Hello, my fellow Westorians. Greetings. I'm Aziz. With me is Ashaya, and this is Valar Rereadis, where we look for the foreshadowing we missed, new depth in the world building, a better understanding of the plot lines, greater familiarity with the characters, and more fun than you can fit in all 7 hells. This is really cool. We're doing this one public. It's the first Valar Rereadis other than our Game of Thrones wrap-up episode where we're going public. And also, it's the first one on a Monday. And there'll be occasionally more episodes on Mondays. In fact, 2 weeks from now, the Halloween weekend, we're doing, well, I guess it's technically the weekend before Halloween, but the week of Halloween, the Monday, the 28th, is the next time we're doing this, 2 weeks from today. And, well, it's kind of neat looking at this chapter. Shay and I were laughing a lot as we prepared for this one because there's just so many good quotes, so many funny moments. And, well, let's get through a couple of really quick announcements and deal with what we've got today, which is this is part 3 of 12, A Clash of Kings, which is going to include Arya 3, the one where Arya sees wolves, a.k.a. the gang witnesses the bad news about the Riverlands.
Davos I, the gang burns the gods, aka the one with fLightbringer.
fLightbringer. It looks better than it sounds. fLightbringer, kind of misleading.
I like fLightbringer. fLightbringer.
It's like F Society for Mr. Robot. Theon I, the one where Theon returns home, aka the Iron Gang prepares for war with the Wolf Gang.
Daenerys I, the gang hits the Red Waste, aka the one with the City of Bones.
Jon II, the gang visits Whitetree, a.k.a. the one where all the Wildlings are missing.
And Arya 4, the one where Arya saves Jaqen, a.k.a. the gang kills Yoren.
Yeah, and also next week we're doing 7 chapters instead of 6. And you might say, well, hey, Aziz, why didn't you just do 4 chapters for that first A Clash of Kings episode so that you could do 4, then 6, 6, 6, 6, 6 all the way till the end instead of 3, 6, 6, 7, 6, 6. Well, the reason is because I wanted all the Blackwater chapters to line up in one episode. So all 5 of the Blackwater battle episodes are in one episode near the end, and there's at the end of that there's one Dany chapter as well. But if we did it a different way, it would be kind of like part of the Blackwater. The next week we finish it. So I just wanted all those to line up. So if it worked out okay with the schedule just being a slight tweak to make that work. So I'm glad we're doing that. So glad to see everybody here today. Questions, you can ask us questions for each chapter. We'll handle questions at the end of each chapter. Q&A portion comes at the end of each one. And I was doing a little extra research on lengths of chapters. There's word counts, which we've put out before, page counts we've put out before. But I never really put up the audiobook times. That's something that I think is interesting. They line up pretty well. For example, page counts and audiobook lengths are going to be pretty consistent with each other. But it's kind of fun to take note of the longest and shortest chapters just for the heck of it. The longest one this time is Theon. It's 58:32. That's the second longest chapter in the book. It's quite long. And following that, we have Davos I, which is 47 minutes, 43 seconds, which is pretty long also. Daenerys' chapter is 40 minutes, 34 seconds. And then the 2 Arya chapters together are only a little longer than the 1 Theon chapter. Combined there, it's a little over an hour. And so they're 21 minutes and 40 minutes. And then the Jon chapter is only 17 minutes and 12 seconds, which is, I think, the 3rd shortest in the whole book. But long and short, these chapters have a lot you can say about them. It tends to be the long ones we have the most to say about, obviously. But that's not always true. Sometimes when there's a lot of action, there's less to describe on our point. George handles the battles so well. There's not as much analysis when it's just, swords, cutting people's heads off. There's not as much to say about that. So, and in that, from that example, well, we have Arya's 2nd chapter, which is longer than her 1st, but a lot of it's battle. And, we have a lot to say about that chapter, but not a whole lot to say about the actual battle part. And if you're interested in listening to the books, I have listened to them a lot of times. I don't know how many. I don't know how many times I've read them either. But you can get 2 free downloads of an audiobook from audible.com if you go to our website. And maybe you'll enjoy listening to the books if reading them is regularly is too much of a time sink. Maybe you can combine listening to A Song of Ice and Fire with some other activity like, well, yard work, cleaning the house, cat boxes. That's what I do. All right, let's go straight to Arya 3, the one where Arya sees wolves, aka the gang witnesses the bad news about the Riverlands. That, of course, is a reference to Catelyn 1, which we covered last week, where the gang gets bad news about the Riverlands. So many of the chapters in Clash are longer and fuller than the ones in the Game of Thrones, but many of Arya's are kind of on the smaller side. She has a lot of chapters this book, but they're kind of spread out a bit. There's a lot of them early in the book, and then a lot of them at the end, and then not as many in the middle. But they're important, despite this difference of style, and they can pack a major punch while being small, like Arya herself. The first line of this chapter is, quote,
"The road was little more than 2 ruts through the weeds."
That opening line makes me think of Jaehaerys Targaryen, who noted that far too many roads all around Westeros fit that description, and that's where the King's Road came from. And this tells us that they're not on the King's Road, because the King's Road is, well, it's a lot more than 2 ruts through the weeds. Since that run-in with the Gold Cloaks, Yoren moved them off the King's Road, because if they stayed on the King's Road, well, they'd be pretty easy to find. And instead, he's on these side roads. He's having them go around the God's Eye, which is the longer way, much longer, but also the far more likely to be free of Gold Cloaks way. So, makes sense. Unfortunately, taking this other route is actually more dangerous for reasons that Yoren was not aware of. For one thing, it just causes them to run out of supplies sooner, which that they kind of expected. But there's some irony here that there's 2 men going to the wall for poaching, and their skills are hugely valuable, and in fact, they continue to poach and steal crops and things like that. So, just to be clear, poaching is just hunting, but illegal. Will, the prologue character, was a poacher, and he was really good at what he did. He was really quiet moving through the woods. It was noted that he was an excellent ranger. So a lot of poachers probably end up making decent rangers, or great rangers in some cases. And one of these poachers is also used as a scout. Makes sense that he would have similar abilities in that regard. At one point he sees this banner, quote,
"A spotted tree cat, yellow and black, on a mud-brown field."
Yoren doesn't know what house that is, nor do most people. Even we had to look that one up, so there you go. And it was still not a house I'd ever heard of. House Myatt. We have no individual names from House Myatt, but they do pop up again as part of Tywin's funeral escort, which may indicate they're direct vassals of Casterly Rock, but maybe not. Maybe House Myatt will pop up again. Now, this is also the chapter where the character Weasel is introduced, though for quite a while she's just called the Crying Girl. She's brought in with her mother, who is dying after losing most of her arm. Now, the Crying Girl, Weasel, is helpless, and she's projecting the fear expressed by the entire group. She's, as a kid, she's not holding it in. She's just being a kid and expressing herself. Fear sometimes brings people close together, particularly when it's shared, and Hot Pie and Arya have that here. They become a bit closer because of that shared fear. I think if this were later in the series, Arya would have given the half-armed woman the gift of mercy, perhaps, because she's like that, and she knows that she's suffering, and then there's no hope for this woman. Arya's skills, speaking of in the future, her skills are growing even without training, something that could matter quite a lot later. After she leaves the House of Black and White, there's a pretty good chance that her training is never quote-unquote complete, right? She just leaves before she's done because they fall into conflict, or who knows why, but it's entirely possible she leaves before they tell her she's done training. In any case, in this chapter, the types of things she does really well are being sneaky and quiet as a shadow. And with all this talk of shadows, I hadn't considered all that much how Arya is included, as a shadow. But that line comes up often, meaning quiet as a shadow. 8 times in this book, 9 times in A Game of Thrones. She seems to take it to heart afterwards and doesn't repeat it over and over to herself. It's like part of her rather than being something she needs to remind herself of. It only comes up once again in Storm and once in the Mercy chapter. This is the last chapter where it comes up more than once. It seems that Yoren's death is foreshadowed here. Not only is there the ending line of the last chapter where he says they're welcome to his head if they can get it off his shoulders, but there are multiple references to the sour leaf making his mouth look bloody. And of course, there's also just his decision to go into what I could call Tywin's kill zone, the area that he has told his worst men to, raid and reave and burn. So Yoren kind of went there without knowing he was going there. So that's not good. Along with that ominous bit of the bloody mouth, we have what's been described in Catelyn 1, as I said, getting the bad news about the Riverlands, which is that they find out that Tywin has ordered this campaign of devastation against the Riverlands, and they're seeing it here. Catelyn and Robb and them hear about it, but in this chapter is where they're seeing it. There's fires, there's lots of corpses, there's wolves. And Arya's encounter with the wolves is a brief but interesting moment, as Yoren tells her kind is fond of wolves. And he means Starks when he says your kind, but we know there's a deeper meaning, which is that, she's going to be a skin changer, though that hasn't awoken in her yet. But arguably it does awaken in her at least a little in her next chapter, which we'll be getting to at the end of this episode. So I'd like to think, we like to think that Gendry, his helmet, it's kind of like his equivalent to Arya's needle. It's like a one thing of his that reminds him of where he came from. If it's like his past is kind of wrapped up in that. And that's a great take. That's from Joe Buckley. Also on the logistical side, we get of Ravenry, that is. We know that ravens can't just fly to any castle they want to. A few of them can. There's a few, they're described as rare, clever birds like that. They have to be brought from castle to castle via cage, and then they can be let go and they fly to the castle they're familiar with no matter where they are. And we see that there are raven cages in Yoren's wagons. I assume they are going to Castle Black, but they don't get there. And, maybe there's other places on the way they were supposed to go, but it seems like Castle Black is likely. I wonder if this little bit is foreshadowing here. Quote,
she remembered a story old Nan had told once about a man imprisoned in a dark castle by evil giants. He was very brave and smart, and he tricked the giants and escaped. But no sooner was he outside the castle than the others took him and drank his hot red blood. Now she knew how he must have felt.
Yeah. So the giants could be the Umbers. It's their sigil, and there are several Umbers around. But who would escape from the Umbers only to be killed by the others? I don't know about that. I mean,
just picturing Rickon.
Yeah, Rickon and the Umbers are associated in the TV show, obviously.
Yeah.
And not a good way for Rickon.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what happens. Maybe Rickon is killed in the books. Rickon's killed by the others instead of the Boltons. I don't know. It's possible.
That's the first person I thought of for what it's worth.
So it's puzzling. I'm not sure if it's foreshadowing or just a story
so that we don't think every single story has relevance in the series.
Yeah, agreed. It doesn't. We don't want to make something out of nothing, but this could be something. So we'll have to keep an eye on how things play out later, and if George uses similar language, they talk about Rickon's hot red blood. We'll be like, hey, we've heard that line before. Question from John Hagee. Do you think Yoren and Masha Heddle ever shared some sour leaf? Hey, good question. Yeah, Masha Heddle, known for her sour leaf intake, and certainly Yoren would have passed by the inn, her inn, several times over his 30 years as a recruiter.
Can we ship them as Yasha? Morin?
Morin, yeah. Morin. So, yeah, maybe they did. It's a missed connection. It's a ship that never sailed. So, Shayan noted something pretty neat here.
Yeah, here's a quote that I just think it's funny, interesting, whatever. And about Arya? When she was being quiet as a shadow, she could sneak past all of them, flitting out by starlight to make her water in the woods, where no one would see. Once, when Lamy Greenhands had the watch, she shimmied up an oak and moved from tree to tree until she was right above his head and he never saw a thing. She would have jumped down on top of him, but she knew his scream would wake the whole camp, and Yoren might take a stick to her again. And obviously, with the whole Night King thing, it's
Yeah.
just really funny.
With her being unseen as she gets around the others and no one hearing
high,
her. Up high, yeah.
Jumping down. It's just, I don't think it has any real relevance, but it tickled me.
I think it's a coincidence. I agree with you, but it is a great coincidence. It's really good. I totally missed that. Ashay pointed that out maybe 30 minutes before we went live, so good timing there. Also, you you grabbed this Rorge quote.
Yeah, I liked it too. Rorge, the noseless one, only laughed and said, "There's a hunter now. Lumpy face, lumpy head, rabbit killer."
She does become a hunter, doesn't
Yeah,
she?
she's a straight killer.
She is a straight natural born killer. So yeah, there's a hunter now. He's laughing at her, but well, who's laughing now? Not Rorge. He is dead. So that one's a little on the shorter end, like I said. Or that Arya chapter was, what did I say, about 21 minutes?
Mm-hmm.
So let's move on to a longer, deeper chapter, Davos I. The gang burns the gods, aka the one with fLightbringer. It's also the one where we meet Davos' sons. Well, some of them. We also meet Salador San. And, well, the huge Crescent chapter is so huge in part because of how much it introduces. But this huge Davos chapter shows that there was a lot left to introduce still. So you could say some of Crescent's burden is passed on to Davos. And you can think of that in a couple of ways, because Crescent wanted to kill Melisandre, and eventually Davos tries the same thing. So it's really kind of a similar burden. But that's not what I meant. I was referring to being the POV for Team Stannis, well, until they split apart. Davos, Stannis is going to head for the wall, and Davos is going to go a different direction. And, well, maybe will they ever see each other again? Maybe not. I'm going to lean towards no, but that's getting ahead of ourselves. The first line of Davos's first chapter is,
"The morning air was dark with the smoke of burning gods."
That is such a fantastic first line. Man, it's so evocative. And with George, of course, there's more to it. The burning gods themselves, we have things to say about. We have things to say about the smoke. I don't have too much to say about the fact that it's morning, but hey. Everywhere they go, Team Stannis burns things, or in the case of Blackwater, when Melisandre, captain of the fire squad on Team Stannis, they're the ones who get burned, and even Melisandre not being there. She's still captain of the fire squad on Team Stannis. So it's not meant to be subtle foreshadowing all this fire and stuff. It's blatant. It's said right out here. Quote,
"Pale flames licked at the gray sky. Dark smoke rose, twisting and curling. When the wind pushed it toward them, men blinked and wept and rubbed their eyes. Allard turned his head away, coughing and cursing. A taste of things to come, thought Davos. Many and more would burn before this war was done."
Yeah, just in case that wasn't clear, he says the same thing in the Crescent chapter. He points out that we're going to all end up under the sea, like Patchface is saying, because from his perspective, Stannis is going to war based on Melisandre's prophecy, even though the logistics say it's a terrible idea, because as things stand right now, Renly has this huge manpower advantage, yet Stannis is like, yep, we're going for it, because Melisandre says so. So that makes his sense of dread really quite big. And it's worse because with that sense of dread is paired with the burning of the gods, which, Davos didn't take the gods too seriously, but they have comforted him, and he's prayed to them a lot, and they have comforted most of Westeros, which that part makes him a little uneasy too. Just the fact that his king is turning away from something that gives most of Westeros comfort and relief and is the source of their faith. So anyway, George expresses this several ways. Quote,
"The smell in the air was ugly. Even for soldiers, it was hard not to feel uneasy. It's such an affront to the gods. Most had worshipped all their lives."
Yeah, it's a multi-meaning phrase there. The smell is ugly because of the affront, right? But also it's literally ugly because we're told there's many, many layers of paint and varnish, lacquer, whatever, on these wooden gods. And that would smell terrible. Well, let's keep going. Quote,
"The burning gods cast a pretty light, wreathed in their robes of shifting flame, red and orange and yellow. Septon Bar had once told Davos how they'd been carved from the masts of the ships that had carried the first Targaryens from Valyria. Over the centuries, they had been painted and repainted, gilded, silvered, jeweled. Their beauty will make them more pleasing to R'hllor, Melisandre said when she told Stannis to pull them down and drag them out the castle gates.
Whoa, geez. I mean, it's one thing to, change religions. It's another thing to just be so brutal about it. And the idea that these masts were carved from the first ships the Targaryens brought from Valyria, that, we're going to have to take a second on that one. That is a historical tidbit, and we don't let those pass lightly. So Aegon the Conqueror did not worship the Seven until the end of the conquest, until he showed up at the Starry Sept in Old Town and, allowed himself to be crowned. And part of rulership, king building, empire building 101, you want to adopt the religion of your people most of the time in order to be a part of them, to have that connection, to share beliefs is a big part of being an accepted monarch. So, but what about the fact that Aegon came to Dragonstone? His ancestors came to Dragonstone 100 years before the conquest. So are we saying that these 100-year-old ships were made into the Sept? Maybe. But 100-year-old ships aren't that useful anymore. Maybe they're just fine. But it seems that either this is a story, like an invention of Aegon to make his family's conversion seem, a little bit more authentic. But it's also possible that one of his ancestors put the Sept in. Perhaps some of them worshipped the Seven and built the Sept prior to Aegon. It's possible, but that's also kind of doubtful because the only one with the authority to turn ships into a Sept would be the actual Lord of Dragonstone, right? It wouldn't be one of the others. It wouldn't just be like the Maester or somebody saying, "Hey, you know what? Let's change religions here. Let's turn the Sept over." You need big permission to do that or to be the Lord. So it's not super likely that one of the lords prior to Aegon converted to the Seven because, we probably would have heard about it or it would have been a bigger deal for Aegon to convert. I don't know. It's just not super likely. But it's still really fascinating to imagine the symbology and the logistics of Valyrian ships being turned into statues of the Seven. First of all, the conversion from one religion to another. There's a lot of symbolism there. But if Valyrian ships are stylish like their castles, like picture Dragonstone with the gargoyles and the manticores and the dragons and the wyverns and all that, I can kind of imagine that that's how they do their ships too. Maybe not the exact same animals, but they're probably distinctive. Maybe, like the Braavosi ships have these purple stripes on their hulls, and Salladhor Saan's ships are extremely noticeable. Valyria was this big empire, and you can kind of see how they might want to make it known when their ships are sailing around. They want people to know it's Valyria. They want their presence to be known for, oh, here come the bosses. So I can kind of see them doing things like the way they did Dragonstone, making really decorative hulls and things like that. So imagine these wyverns and gargoyles and dragons being turned into parts of these statues. It says the masts were converted, and I'm talking about the prows, but I think we can imagine that the language is a little loose here. Did they literally mean only the masts? Well, maybe. What happened to the rest of the ship if that's the case? I don't know. Anyway, burning these statues is truly just it's a warm-up, pardon the pun, for more intense burnings. Mel, in that quote, she says the beauty of the statues, all their gildings and jewels, makes it more pleasing to R'hllor, which is that's really dark. I mean, is she saying that beautiful living people are more pleasing to R'hllor? Is that R'hllor cares how beautiful they are? I mean, we have precedent. Well, maybe not precedent. We have antecedent for this. It happens again later when Victarion burns those 7 slave girls at sea. He comments on how beautiful they are and how this will be pleasing to the Red God. And yeah, so that's what he's hoping for anyway. He hopes that this gift is received by R'hllor with happiness or with gratitude or something. So it's kind of strange. But and if she's all about, oh, the beauty of the sacrifice makes it better, then, well, what do we say about her burning the weirwood at Storm's End? It's not beautiful, that's for sure. It's gross. It's terrifying. Those werewoods are frightening. So, I don't know. Melisandre says things, and yeah, they're not meant to always be taken at face value. So we go from painted, jeweled wood to living werewood to living people in terms of the progression of things that get burned. No people are burned in this chapter, but we see that some are getting queued up for that reward later. Quote,
Sir Hubert Ramton led his 3 sons to the Sept to defend their gods. The Ramtons had slain 4 of the queen's men before the others overwhelmed them. Afterward, Gunser Sunglass, mildest and most pious of the lords, told Stannis he could no longer support his claim. Now he shared a sweltering cell with the Septon and Sir Hubert's 2 surviving sons. The other lords had not been slow to take the lesson.
yeah, that's a pretty blatant lesson, right? And they'd have been even quicker to take the lesson if they knew what was coming. Like I said, they were queued up for burning. It's not clear here that that's going to happen, but we do find that out later. And it's interesting, the timing of it, because it's not on Stannis' orders. When Stannis sails to go fight on the Blackwater, Lord Sunglass and these 2 sons are burned on Selyse's orders. So it's interesting. Selyse exercises a lot of power when she can, apparently. She seems to throw her weight around a bit extra when Stannis is gone. Like when he's gone from the wall, she seems to take a greater role, and it's not pleasant. Her men are shown immediately to be aggressive and ambitious. It's them who come in and smash up the Sept and stuff. It's just, well, they're nasty. They're encroaching, you could say. And, well, that just gets worse later, right? We have things like Axel Florent, who I'm going to speak more on him again later, but he's the one that threatens Davos, that, tries to, act like he's going to throw him over the wall. I mean, the walls of Dragonstone, not the wall. If we talk about the ceremony itself, it's awkward, right? It's almost funny. It kind of is funny in a what the hell is going on kind of way. Stannis' cloak catches fire a bit as he's pulling the sword free. Mel calls him a warrior of light and a son of fire, but he's just uncomfortable, and he's not comfortable with the fire. I mean, he's uncomfortable by the whole ceremony, but the actual heat of the fire, it doesn't look right. Doesn't add up to be a son of fire and to be like, get that fire off of me, and it just doesn't work quite well. So Melisandre is serious, but it's hard to take it seriously. She's yelling about the red sword of heroes, but the sword in this scene is de-emphasized, and there's no description of where it came from or anything like that. It's just a sword. You would expect that if the sword were really that special, there would be like a description of the hilt or anything. It's just, he just leaves it out, which is in itself a big deal. That's a suggestion by omission. And Davos even looks at it and kind of thinks that, well, quote, the red sword of heroes looks like a proper mess. And then Stannis walks off without it, lets his squire grab it. He doesn't show any reverence for it. And so an astute reader, I mean, the first time this time we know better already, at least sort of. But, if you're going through it the first time, you're thinking, wait, is this just a sword she stuck in the fire and claimed was special? Yeah, that is basically what happened, except there's also some glamoring, which, that's the essence of Melisandre, right? We've talked about this so much, and it's not just Melisandre who does this. There's Euron, there's other characters. The idea being that she uses real fire and a glamour on a regular longsword. It's that same thing. Real minor magic exaggerated with tricks to look like major magic. And it's that whole trappings of power thing again. She's showing all the trappings of Azor Ahai. She's got the comet, the Dragonstone itself, the burning gods. But we're left looking at what happened with Dany and going, wait a minute, that was a real thing. That was a buildup of several chapters, dreams, foreshadowing, suspense, all this stuff, and it's the epic conclusion to book 1. This scene, on the other hand, it's out of nowhere. The idea that this guy, Stannis, could be a prophesied hero, it comes out of nowhere compared to Dany. It's meant to feel off. It's meant to be awkward. From the get-go, the idea that Stannis is Azor Ahai is supposed to be questionable. It's not supposed to be something that we find out later, like, oh, he's not? It's supposed to be something you know right away is a bit of a fraud, but the puzzling part is why. Like, Melisandre has to know this too. But then later we see her POV, and she's not sitting here admitting to herself, haha, I fooled them all. So a little more on that later in this chapter, but also more as we go through Davos's arc. Let me back up a bit and talk about some of the Azor Ahai language that's being used through Davos's point of view. Quote,
"The old dry wood and countless layers of paint and varnish blazed with a fierce, hungry light. Heat rose, shimmering through the chill air. Behind the gargoyles and stone dragons on the castle walls seemed blurred, as if Davos were seeing them through a veil of tears, or as if the beasts were trembling, stirring."
Yeah, stirring. The allusion to stone dragons awakening. The veil of tears is a reference to salt, dry wood, and paint causing smokes. You got smoke, salt, waking dragons from stone, right? And Salladhor Saan, though, he's there to make sure, in case the reader doesn't get it, that we question all of this. He calls the sword burnt, not burned. And he explains the Azor Ahai prophecy, the full story of Nissa Nissa, etc., all that. And Davos is there to question that. The idea that Azor Ahai is somehow a hero. He's like, if killing your wife is what it takes to be a hero, I don't have what it takes to be a hero. We know better. We know that Davos is very heroic. We don't know that necessarily at this point, but we know that later. And, well, we kind of know that at this point. We know, we at least know that he's the guy that sailed into Storm's End with fish and onions. But that didn't make him a hero. It's really more just his personality over time. It isn't just one act here and there that he does. It's just getting to know him and realizing that he's good people. So it's interesting that fake Lightbringer is shoved into the mother's chest. Out of all the 7 statues, it's the mother that gets the sword, which is perhaps in accord with the idea that Azor Ahai stabs Nissa Nissa in the chest, and she's his wife. Now, we don't know for a fact that Nissa Nissa was a mother, but she was not likely a crone, and married implies she's not likely to be a maiden either. So if Dany is Azor Ahai and Jon stabs her, well, she's the mother of dragons, which is the first time the mother of dragons is said by someone outside of a dream is, well, her first chapter coming up shortly. So we have elements of that scene here as well. Mother and Azor Ahai, Nissa Nissa being stabbed, all that. So there's clues right away that Melisandre should be looking at Dany instead of Stannis for Azor Ahai. And, we have these two complementary conflagrations. The pyre, Stannis and Melisandre's pyre and Dany's pyre. And, well, it's just the differences are huge, right? I mean, like I said, Stannis's pyre is out of nowhere from a literary perspective, and it doesn't seem like there's anything really magical going on, whereas in Dany's case, it's blatantly, overtly magic. You have her surviving the fire. Talk about child of fire. Talk about son of fire. Well, she's daughter of fire, bride of fire. And yeah, anyway. So the idea that Mel can see the future in the flames, that is brought up here too, not directly. It's Axel Florent who brings it up and says, Melisandre can see the future in the flames. He claims he has the ability to. Mel later expresses doubt at this, and of course, I think nearly every reader agrees that, no, Axel is full of it. He's the same one who tries to bully Davos into backing his plan to making him hand and attacking Claw Isle. He's the one who says we should attack the Celtigars and make an example of them. And here's his quote, though. It's interesting, even though I think he's full of it. The quote is still interesting.
"It seemed to me as I watched the fire this morning that I was looking at a dozen beautiful dancers, maidens garbed in yellow silk, spinning and swirling before a great king." And Aziz, I'll tell you, when I look into a fire, I see a dozen beautiful maidens too, spinning and swirling.
So what that could mean, but swirling and spinning before a great king, I mean, it sounds a little bit like Blackwater, but not, because there's no great king at the end of Blackwater. It's Joffrey still. It could be, if we're all tying this all to Dany, because so much of this chapter is things attributed to Stannis or this ritual that are actually supposed to be attributed to Dany a half a world away. So if we think about that in light of this quote, well, maybe this is foreshadowing the burning of King's Landing. Maidens garbed in yellow silk, spinning and swirling is somewhat similar to the language used by George when Dany is staring into her great pyre. George gets really descriptive with fire, so maybe it's just the way he loves to describe fire. But he uses anamorphic language, like the fire as a person, like these beautiful dancers, maidens garbed in yellow silk. That kind of device is something he uses for fire. And, well, something to think about for sure. And I don't mean the idea that Axel has prophetic abilities, but this could be foreshadowing for King's Landing kind of indirectly. But heck, maybe he really is seeing things and he's just bad at interpreting them, not unlike Melisandre herself. Axel also is the guy that tries to get Jon to marry him to Val. So, this dude. The letter itself, Stannis' letter to everyone. Well, it's interesting because, well, we see it's also part of the plot. It's important to push this incest plot, the War of Five Kings forward, but it also gives us insight into who Stannis is. His sticklering? I made up a word. Him being such a stickler for detail and for being honest to the point of it being a fault. And his correction on Jaime, Sir Jaime, the Kingslayer, all that stuff. And, not calling his brother beloved. That is very insightful into Stannis' personality. Like, people aren't that rigid with grammar without it meaning other things about their personality. You don't have people who are that grammar Nazi-ish without it saying other things about that. No one's just a stickler for grammar and not other things. Not that they're necessarily someone who's a stuck up about Stannis is going to be so stuck about everything else, but it's a great choice by George for how to display his personality. So there's a lot. I mean, not only is you can't look at all this stuff of Stannis being kind of a stand-in for Daenerys, like a proto Dany, and not see all these other things they have in common. I could have done one of these parallel lives on Dany and Stannis. It stands out even more for the TV show because there's a full arc to compare. But even at this point in the books, there's a huge bunch of parallels. Similar lineage, both believe they're rightful ruler of Westeros. They're both associated with Azor Ahai and the Castle Dragonstone. There's all these parallels of sacrifices and burnings and prophecies and similar prophecies. So, and if the show is any guide, they both interrupt their plans to take the throne in order to head north to fight the others. So that's a big one too. But Stannis also has something in common with Tyrion. And I'm not talking about the Targaryen blood, but that could be something they have in common if Tyrion has Targaryen blood. But, that's not what I'm talking about now. I mean that both of them are aware that it's better to be loved than feared in cases like this, meaning when there's multiple claimants and you need to recruit men. But neither Stannis nor Tyrion ever expects the people to love them. They both think that that's never going to be an option for them. And, well, here's a quote.
They will not love me, you say? When have they ever loved me? How can I lose something I have never owned? Right?
He doesn't even consider it a possibility. He's like, no, they're not going to, they haven't loved me, nor will they ever love me. And that's pretty similar to how Tyrion feels. It's pretty similar to how Tyrion governs. He's just like, shoves that off to the side because it's hopeless. Like, well, I'm not going to think about how much they like me because that's a lost cause. And Stannis is similar in that regard. And they act like it. They don't mince words. They don't try to sweeten the pot or sweeten their words or to make it easier for people to deal with them. They just go with it. When Tyrion orders the chain to be made, which we'll be talking about next week, a lot of the armorers and blacksmiths complain that this work is beneath them. And Tyrion's response is just to threaten them. He doesn't try to cajole them or to say, look, we need this. It's about the war. He just tells them this is how it's going to be. He doesn't really try to make them feel good about it. He doesn't, apologize for the stain on their honor or whatever. And this is similar. It's actually worse. Like, Stannis is here trying to make everyone change their religion. And he's just basically forcing it down their throats. He's not really like, look, this is why we're doing it. Here, work with me. He's just like, no. He's not. There's no explanation. There's no compromise. There's just, this is how it is. Do it. Don't question it. Jon kind of does that too, frankly, with some of his changes to how he runs the watch. He has good reasons for a lot of what he does, but he doesn't get consensus from his officers. He doesn't spend a lot of time making them understand his point of view. Now, back to a comparison with Stannis and Tyrion. They both see also firsthand from an elder brother and a younger one in Stannis' case, the power of charisma. So they both have firsthand knowledge of how powerful charisma can be while not having any of it on their own. Like Robert won a lot of following when people had to choose between him and Aerys because people liked Robert more. But if it was Stannis versus Aerys, likability might not come into it. They would make their decision on other things. And the same thing's happening right now with Renly. Renly is winning tons of followers because he's likable, popular, handsome, etc. Things that Stannis doesn't have. Now, Stannis, as much as he's been around popularity and seen charisma work, he still doesn't fully grasp how, certain normal people things, right? Like, again, the belief in the gods. He doesn't understand what a huge thing that is to change. To him, from his privileged position, he does something that most common people would not have the audacity to even feel or think in the first place. He stops worshiping the gods because he's mad at them because of what they did to his parents. They don't deserve my worship. Like, that is not the attitude a common person has about the gods. It's not about what they deserve. The gods are just all-powerful beings that get what they want. There's no negotiating with the gods. There's no, being on level with them. And Stannis is putting himself, not on their level, but saying that he has a right to choose, which is not how worship generally is. If you believe in gods, you believe that you owe them something or that they'll kill you or do things because they're just so much more powerful. But Stannis is just like, nah, I'm not worshiping them anymore because they killed my parents. They don't deserve my worship, as if his worship is something worth having. So it's really interesting how he frames that, which is just something that someone who isn't a High Lord would never put it that way. So I think that's, yet more telling about Stannis' character, and also just in a way that shows how distant he is from normal people. He does not understand commoners, just like Davos thinks about how he doesn't understand weakness and certain other things like that. Now, weakness is a normal thing. We all have weaknesses. I have weaknesses. Every single one of us has weaknesses, whether we admit them or not. But Stannis is the kind of guy that, because he doesn't admit weaknesses, that is a big separation from him and normal people. So we touch on I want to touch on the Proudwing story, and I think that there's a lot of great takes on the Proudwing story out there, but I think I have one that maybe is a little different. The story is framed as about Stannis, but I think it's about Davos, about Stannis. Let me unpack that. Meaning, the story is written that Stannis needed to move on. He's framing it as, well, the Seven never did anything for me. They never brought me the power I needed. They haven't brought me the throne that I deserve. Maybe Melisandre and the Red God will. Maybe that's going to help me. Which is interesting, just as an aside. This is like the same thing Sam says to him, but in a much more like milder tone. He's like, well, the Seven never answered my prayers. I'm going to try the old gods. And, in the North, they're like, all right, cool. You're not making anyone else do it, so it's fine. So Stannis, on the other hand, is trying to make other people worship his new god. That's where the rub is. Anyway, back to that. He talks about how maybe I'll get power from this. Maybe this will get me what I need. So it's very utilitarian. He's switching gods because he thinks that what it can do for him, not because there's some belief. It has nothing to do with being devout or faith or anything like that. In fact, Lord Courtney or Sir Courtney Penrose will call Stannis and his followers out for switching lords and gods, like he switches his boots. And, well, it's a pretty good point that Sir Courtney brings up, but more on him when we get there. And so the reason I think this is about Davos, though, is think about that same situation of following something and it just isn't working. You love it. You feel like it deserves, you have a connection to it, but it's not going to fly. Literally, Proudwing is not going to fly. Not very high anyway. Stannis is not going to be king, y'all. He's not. He's going to crown himself, and at some point he's going to die, most likely, and will not sit the Iron Throne at the end. He's never going to rule over Westeros. And if you think about Davos hitching himself to Stannis' star. If you think of Davos as having Proudwing, if Stannis is Proudwing in this analogy, Davos is going to have to switch kings just like Stannis had to switch birds, because Stannis is not going to be there. Stannis is not going to be the one to, cross the goal line, so to speak. And if the show is any indication, it's Jon he's going to switch to. That's the one he's going to hitch to. He's going to switch to Jon. And that makes, you can kind of see Jon being, Stannis being Davos's Proudwing and Jon being, well, his new bird without a name. Ghost wing? I don't know what you call it. Wolf wing? Proud wolf. So there's a lot of let's move on from that point. But
I think you missed it. It's brood wing.
Yes. Score. That is definitely what it is. Brood wing. I need a second to get over that one. That's really good. So we also get the hint that Davos can't read here, which we know if you as a first-time reader, that's just a throwaway moment. But when you bringing up that Davos can't read is like that line is just because it's wonderful and tragic all at the same time. Because you think of his wonderful scenes with Shireen and learning to read and how important learning to read is because it's what leads him to push Stannis to going north. I mean, that's a crucial part of him encouraging Stannis to win the throne, to save the realm, to win the throne. Reading the Night's Watch letter about, from Sam, that they're trapped beyond the wall. And at least I think it's from Sam, isn't it? Maybe it's from Aemon. I forget. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It came from the wall, and it's huge. So I think that's it's another great example of a tiny, seemingly unimportant line that's just massive. And of course, then there's, like I said, there's tragedy rolled up in that because it makes you think of Shireen, and well, yeah, that's no fun at all. And Davos thinks about his sons. He thinks about how his sons will one day be on the level with some of these other noble houses. He's thinking about how Lord Velaryon and Lord Celtigar and these guys just wouldn't give him the time of day. Well, maybe that's because watches hadn't been invented, but they think he's below them, and he thinks that one day he'll be up there with them, and that's kind of funny, right? Hand of the king, he'll definitely be up there one day, and his sons as well. But he thinks of his wife, and he thinks of her in light of Nissa, and well, yeah, here we go. I love this quote. We talked about it already, but I wanted to get the quote in here.
Yeah. When he thought of Nissa, it was his own Marya he pictured. A good-natured, plump woman with sagging breasts and a kindly smile, the best woman in the world. He tried to picture himself driving a sword through her and shuddered. I am not made of the stuff of heroes, he decided. If that was the price of a magic sword, it was more than he cared to pay. And that's just a beautiful quote. Very nice sentiments. Says a lot about Davos and about, the idea of sacrifice. But also, write to your wife, Davos, once you learn to read.
Well, he does write to her in Dance with Dragons, but you're right.
I'm right.
It takes a while.
Yes. If she's the best woman in the world, she deserves more.
Yeah, he can dictate a letter. I mean. So yeah, and of course, behind the Azor Ahai stuff, there's also just the concept of Valyrian steel and the price of a magic sword, because that is apparently what we hear is part of the ingredients to making Valyrian steel. Not killing your wife, to be specific, but blood magic. Apparently there is human sacrifice involved in Valyrian steel. Apparently it's usually slaves, but this all ties together, and it's a big wow. And it's fun to see the beginnings of all these plots and how George has planted the seeds. One thing we know to look for in a lot of these first chapters is the way George likes to give us clues as to not only how this book will end for that character, but how their entire arc will end when they have their actual first chapter period. So that's one thing interesting about this chapter is it's Davos' first chapter ever. So we would expect to maybe see clues for how his arc will end in this book, which we do. There's lots of Blackwater symbolism and foreshadowing here. So that's covered. As far as his eventual finish, though, well, that's why I'm talking about the Proudwing stuff. That's why I think maybe it deals with him switching over to Jon. Because show Davos versus book Davos, that may not line up as well as some of the other characters. Davos, I mean, the fact that he survives and is part of the new regime and helping reform Westeros, I can see that. But it's not like he does anything on the show that's like vital to that after, all the dust settles. It could be done without him. So maybe they kept Davos around on the show because he's so damn popular. He was such a great character. He's definitely one of those that I am not super confident about that we know what's going to happen to him in the books, which is a good thing. I mean, well, kind of a good thing. It's good because it's a mystery. It's bad because if he doesn't live, then we have to read about him dying, and that's not something I'm looking forward to at all. So let's hope he has a different story from the show, so we get something new, but that he still survives and gets to go to Maria, and hopefully some of his sons are still alive at the end of it, because we know at least 4 of them are dead by the end of this book. Joe Buckley points out that, yes, while maybe Stannis and Tyrion have some things in common, there are some things they don't have in common, which that's clear, but specifically, Stannis thinks more about the small folk, even though he doesn't understand them as well. He understands the pressure of the small folk, and he seems to have more respect for small folk in seeing them as options for advancement. You know what I mean? Like Davos used to be a commoner, and we see how other lords reject Davos because of his birth, and Stannis doesn't. So Stannis, while being farther apart from commoners in terms of disposition and personality, he has more respect for their lives than people who in his similar position, or even people who are lower rank than him. And Tyrion doesn't disrespect the commoners in that way. He doesn't look down on them in that regard. I'm not saying he, holds them in high regard either, but he doesn't speak to them about the incest like Stannis does. Stannis's letter, a big part of it is making sure that everyone hears, not just the lords and but the small folk too, to put pressure on the whole realm. And that's also logistically, it's smart because it means that it's harder to bury. If you just read the letter, if you just hand the letter to a certain lord in a certain castle, he might just throw that letter in the fire and no one ever in his region hears about it. But if you just go out there to the ports and to walking around the fields and the markets and just read these letters out loud, it's going to get out. There's just no stopping it. And interestingly, too, comparison to Arya. Arya is out there on the ground floor with the small folk, is, back and forth, is and isn't. Whereas Davos is actually our first real POV, sustained POV, who is not a born noble. I mean, you could say Crescent and Will are one-offs of that sort, but repeatedly, every other POV we get, from the one-offs like Barristan and Aeron Damphair and Aerys Oakhart and things like that. You could argue Melisandre was perhaps born a commoner, but she's so far gone from that and has we've only barely scratched the surface on her background as far as her being a slave. So we don't know. Her commoner stuff is too far gone. We don't know enough about it, and she's only had 1 chapter. So anyway, that's really cool. And Joe wonders, have we ever met anyone who's made as big a leap as Davos has? From Flea Bottom to Knight and then all the way to Hand of the King. Even Littlefinger can't match that. Yeah, good point. I can't think of anyone else who's made a big leap as that, except for Sir Duncan the Tall, who arguably doesn't... It's arguable that Dunk doesn't go as far as Davos, because Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, you could argue that's not as high as Hand of the King. But Davos isn't actually Hand of the King to the sitting king. That's the counter argument. So we'll call it a tie.
You could also say that Davos maybe was higher or less, lower or higher than Duncan originally. Oh yeah,
good point. Jade Green Fire of Lightbringer. Interesting, right? That some of the fire on Lightbringer is actually green. It's not. It looks, meaning not that it is wildfire, just looks like wildfire and reminds us of that. But not this early. We've hardly heard of wildfire at this point in the story. So it's definitely one of those catch-on reread kind of things. Be on the lookout for that. So that's just yet another piece of foreshadowing for Blackwater. Will Moss, Sword of the Mid-Afternoon, about 3:30, Super Chat asks, given that Melisandre actually believes in the prophecy, then why would she want to fake the fulfillment of that prophecy with fLightbringer? So, actually, a couple people have asked about this. So Will and the rest of y'all, this is directed for you. I think what it is that she wants to, once you have the apparatus in place, like meaning the apparatus, meaning a population aware of Azor Ahai and looking for this prophecy and expecting it to happen, it's a lot easier to say, oh, I just got one detail wrong. It's actually this, rather than waiting for something to happen and then saying, oh, look, here's the sign we were waiting for. Because if you wait for that sign, the real sign, too much time has passed. You need things to be ready. You need to strike while the iron is hot. So Melisandre is building this apparatus, meaning this following for R'hllor. She's encouraging people to believe in it, and she's doing anything she can to get that belief, to plant that seed. So that even if, because once you're devout, once you're faithful, once you're a zealot, we all know how this works. Think about how zealots work in the real world, y'all. You give them some evidence that there's something's wrong with their zealotry. Does that make them not be zealots? Nah, that does not, right? That's not how the real world works. It's not how this world works either. Once people are that deep in the rabbit hole, you can't just show them logic and evidence to get them out of it. It takes more than that. It takes other things. It takes, well, Selyse, maybe for Selyse, it might take seeing her daughter burned or something like that. But Selyse, I mentioned Selyse because she's the one that brings all this to Stannis. She's the one that Melisandre finds first. She's the Lysa, the weak-willed person that these ideas can take hold in and then spread. It's almost like a virus. Like the reason vaccination works the way it does is herd immunity, right? And so if you find, but if one person, like one older or younger person that's doesn't have the right antibodies, then they can become a carrier for that disease, and then it can start to infect people who are healthier. Well, Selyse is like that carrier. She's the R'hllor disease haver. She has the virus of R'hllor, and she's spreading it to other people. And it's a smart choice by Melisandre because, she's Stannis' wife. She's a really powerful person. But you got to think about it from her perspective, too. And this just goes to what I'm saying about how zealots don't use logic. This prophecy that she is foisting on her husband and everyone, this prophecy says that Stannis is Azor Ahai. Azor Ahai kills his own wife. What does Selyse think about that? It's like, hey, husband, you're Azor Ahai, and that means, wait, does that mean you're going to kill me? Am I Nissa Nissa? Hold on, I did not think this through. I mean, so she's already bought in despite that. So telling, if someone comes to her and is like, actually Stannis isn't Azor Ahai, it's this person, she can flip the switch to that instead, because she's already bought into the concept of R'hllor, she's already bought into the concept of the others, all that. That's all going to be the same. If you change who the prophet is, all that other stuff stays the same. You still have the comment, you still have everything. So I think it's just that she's spreading that virus. Once that's spread, once it's there, it's hard to cure, even with logic, even with evidence. It just doesn't work that way. So I think that's it's a clever way for George to play with that in this world, because that's a question people have been wondering since Clash of Kings came out. It's like, how could Melisandre do that? And it was mostly expected. Now, I say that this has been discussed since Clash of Kings, but it wasn't until A Dance with Dragons that people really started to key in on some of these ideas and narrow them down. Because for a long time, the idea was that Melisandre was just lying, willfully lying for some other end. Now, we still know she's willfully lying, but now that we've had a POV of her, that was the big change, that we got to see inside her head. We know that she's just it's not a scam. She really believes all this stuff. She's lying for a purpose, but it's not some self-advancement. It's not her purpose, so to speak. It's she really does believe that the world is going to end, that this is needed. She devoutly believes that the darkness is coming, all that stuff. So, yeah. Whew, need to take a breath, right? So that's a similar question was asked by Paul Berry on Patreon and a lot of other y'all. So I hope that answers it. And, some specific questions like, well, how did she decide to pick this particular sword? Can she just make another Lightbringer sword? And yeah, it's just people like Eamon who point out that, the sword has no heat. It's just light. Well, most people don't know that because very few people actually get close to it. So she knows these things will work.
Can I share a joke?
Oh yeah, of
From
course.
Koi Vanazi in the chat talking about why Selyse would go along with this.
Yeah.
They said, only way for her to get her husband's sword. It's really good.
Oh. Wow. She's like, nah, he won't stick his sword in me. He never does that. That's why she's not worried about it.
Okay.
That's really good. That's really good. A plus joke. Good job, Koivanazi. So let's talk about Davos' sons a bit. Speaking of being sacrificed to a greater cause. Of course, no one knew they were being sacrificed, not even Melisandre, but you can say that they were sort of sacrificed at the altar of this quest for the throne. On the TV show, it's Mathos that we see, and Mathos is devout to R'hllor, which is not the case in the books. So let me settle that just to straighten things out in case anyone forgot. Davos' sons are not devout here. In fact, they complain about burning the gods, but the fifth-born son, Devon, is Stannis' squire, and he does convert, and he is still alive, unlike his 4 elder brothers. So hey, maybe they should have converted to R'hllor. If they converted to R'hllor, they might still be alive. Nah. And the youngest 2 have not even been seen yet, although they might be captives of the Golden Company by now. Much of the Stormlands has been overrun by the Golden Company, and that general area where where House Seaworth is said to have their seat, we don't know exactly where it is, but that general area has been overrun by the Golden Company. So that's
we actually got a question about that too from Minge Forever. Who
we
asked,
did. Okay, cool.
Do you think Young Griff's conquest will affect Davos' family? And other people were like, I wonder if Euron's would, or anyone's conquest would affect them.
I think this one, I think that's a yes. It's hard to say exactly how, and maybe Davos won't find out about it in order to, it's given where he is, he's not going to be receiving any messages directly from his home, but surely he will hear about the Stormlands being overrun by the Golden Company and Aegon at some point. But it really so much depends on where he's at when he hears about it and what else is going on. He may be besieged at the wall, or running from the others in Winterfell by the time he hears about it, and literally has no way to leave, even if he wants to. So let's take another quote here that's important. Shay is going to read about about House Velaryon here.
Lord Velaryon was watching the king rather than the conflagration. Davos would have given much to know what he was thinking, but one such as Velaryon would never confide in him. The Lord of the Tides was of the blood of ancient Valyria, and his house had thrice provided brides for Targaryen princes. Davos Seaworth stank of fish and onions. And now that's especially funny because, one, already Davos is Stannis Baratheon's, confidant.
Yeah.
And he is actually of the blood of old Valyria too. But Jon Snow, who is half Stark, half Valyrian, which is about as prestigious as you can be. If the show means anything, Davos will be a confidant for him too.
Yeah, so this is George using his clever misdirect where he has a character think this will never happen for himself, or he's thinking himself in a certain light when the exact opposite is going to happen. So yeah, this is when we look at this and we think, what does this first chapter, because it's the first Davos chapter, again, I want to emphasize how important that is. What does this chapter tell us about his arc? And here you go. This is talking about how he's going to rise high. And I love it. So it's also mentioned in this quote, since we can't let history slide by without talking about it. 3 princesses for House Targaryen via House Velaryon, you say A. Yes, we do say A. So let's name those 3. Alyssa, who is the Alyssa Velaryon, that's the wife of Aenys Targaryen. So the first batch of princes born after the Iron Throne was formed were from a Valyrian queen. And of course, Aegon, Rhaenys, and Visenya, their mother, was a Valyrian as well. So it kind of already ran in the family. Laena, as in wife of Daemon the Rogue Prince, as in she who flew Vhagar. She was also, of course, a princess for House Targaryen. Daenerys, wife of Aegon III, as in mother of Baelor the Blessed and the young dragon and the princesses in the tower, including Dana the Defiant. That is who we're speaking of here. And also Laenor, Laena's brother, was second husband to Rhaenyra, So, and you would think that he would. They didn't have any kids, of course. His kids were not really his kids, but the point being, he was a prince for House Targaryen from House Valyrian. So there's a lot of marriages there. Now, Stannis's peculiar brand of willful stubbornness, we talked about it earlier in a different light, but here it comes up in what I think is a reference to what's coming for Renly. He's talking about Cressen's End. And Stannis is normally really blunt, right? He says the truth. He speaks up. That's generally how he behaves, right? But when he talks about Cressen, he just says he died. He doesn't say he was poisoned. He didn't say he poisoned himself. He didn't say he killed himself. He doesn't speak bluntly about it. And to me, that might be foreshadowing, maybe not foreshadowing, but groundwork for how Stannis is going to talk about Renly. He's like, when I woke up, my hands were clean.
Would you call it three shadowing?
What's that?
Would you call it 3 shadowing?
3 shadowing.
2 shadowing?
2 shadowing. Yeah, it isn't. You're right. It doesn't quite add up to 4, so it's like 2.5 shadowing. A couple of other questions from y'all. From Tree Girl, the Azor Ahai story says he forged Lightbringer in a temple, and she wonders what god was worshipped there. That is a really wonderful question. It could be R'hllor. Worship of R'hllor could be that ancient, but it could be, some other god that's like R'hllor that eventually they gave R'hllor a different name because of language drift and different cultures, and I don't know. But I think there's a decent chance it was R'hllor, or at least R'hllor by a different name. But I love that question. I love anything that makes me really think about ancient history in Westeros or Essos is just, I give extra love for that. So good job, Tree Girl. Stefan B., with a nice catch, he points out that Lord Celtigar is a bit of a lick-spittle here, and perhaps that's a sign, because Lord Celtigar is the one that switches sides after the Blackwater, bends the knee to Joffrey, and he's the one that Axel says they should attack to make an example of. Yeah. A question from Bronhauler. I think she means that the more valued the sacrifice, the more R'hllor values it. So clearly this is reference to the beauty of the sacrifice and how the beauty R'hllor will value it more, prize it more because it's beautiful. And so she says beauty is valued and the gems and the gold themselves are valuable, so thus they are better sacrifices than plain effigies. I guess because it's, it's more of a sacrifice because there's more value in it. I guess I can kind of see that. Yeah, I can kind of see that. Sure.
Yeah, whereas if let's say gems mean nothing in Westeros.
Yeah.
Let's say they were meaningless, they were like rocks. Then they would not be as good of a sacrifice.
Okay.
It's not the gems themselves.
That makes sense, I suppose. Okay. And here's let's read the descriptions of the 7 here. Quote.
They were all of fire now, maid and mother, warrior and smith, the crone with her pearl eyes, and the father with his gilded beard, even the stranger, carved to look more animal than human.
Yeah.
And I just like reading descriptions of little things like the 7 and descriptions of things in general, because George paints a very vivid world, but especially with Game of Thrones, with the TV series, sometimes certain things are supplanted in our mind. One of the ones I thought of in this chapter was Stannis. They describe his blue-black shadow of a beard, which not how I picture Stannis these days.
Yeah. Thanks to Dan Horries for the super chat. And we have one final point to make. Ashea had another catch that I really like.
There's a quote here. Had I stayed a smuggler, Allard would have ended up on the wall. Stannis spared him from that end. Something else I owe him. And, well, one son does end up at the wall.
Yeah, not taking the black, but still. Devon, like we said, he's Melisandre's squire, so to speak, or Stannis' squire, and ends up kind of being Melisandre's squire because Melisandre asks for Devon to stay behind at the wall. So, there you go. That's pretty cool. All right, let us move on to the other of the long chapters of this batch. The other 3 after are varying lengths. Jon is short, Dany is pretty long, and Arya is medium. Theon 1. The one where Theon returns home, a.k.a. the Iron Gang prepares for war with the Wolf Gang, a.k.a. the one where Theon thinks it's all about him.
Yes.
A.k.a. the one with Theon's comet. A.k.a. the one where Theon thinks he's getting Casterly Rock. This dude, I swear. So while we say so many glowing things about Davos and how over time we learn what a great guy he is and how you can get a lot from his POV because he's honest, that's less true in Theon's case. The person whose POVs I think Theon reminds me the most of is Cersei, because he's just so clueless about a lot of things. There's the same sense of inflated importance, the same
confidence. They're very confident.
Unearned confidence, this smugness, this cleverness that really isn't that clever. Like, they both are clever, but they're also naive and missing a lot and don't realize that they're missing a lot. Like, a lot of us are humble because we out there in the world because we know we don't know things. But, you know, the humility of realizing that the world is a complicated place and that there's so many things to know and that you'll never know it all. People like Theon and Cersei just, they learn something and their response is, now I've got it. Now that's it. There's no more beyond that. Now I'm a master of this topic. There's never more to it. They always just think they understand. So this is the first of 6 Theon chapters before he gets his 2-book break as prisoner at the Dreadfort. Now he, of course, returns in Dance with Dragons only to become a prisoner of Stannis. And he's a different sort of prisoner before all this as a hostage of the Starks. And so this is right at the ending of that phase of this life, meaning this first chapter of his. Quote,
"There was no safe anchorage at Pike, but Theon Greyjoy wished to look on his father's castle from the sea, to see it as he had seen it last, 10 years before, when Robert Baratheon's war galley had borne him away to be a ward of Eddard Stark."
And even in this, even in wanting to see it as he had seen it before, he's being a huge jerk. Because the captain is like, this is a little dangerous. The crew is muttering that it's taking them extra time. It's just this waste of effort. And yeah, but Theon wants it his way. And that's just, well, that's a thing. You just keep going in that direction. Theon always just wants it his way. So like the Davos Crescent combo, this is a long chapter because there's a lot to introduce. There's a new region, all the things that entail introducing a new region. We get new culture, we get new religion, we get new characters. And that's always a lot with George because he's not going to stint on the details, and we wouldn't want him to. A pox on those who wish for less. And of course, it's not just about dropping a bunch of world building, because that would be, well, it wouldn't be boring to us, but it wouldn't make for as popular of a story if he just does that all the time. George does such a great job, as always, of weaving the story and the world building together. So we're getting groundwork and setup while the story progresses, and I love it. Some of the setup is, well, it's setup mode, waiting for us to hit in a later book. In other words, some things are set up and immediately delivered. Some things are set up and still haven't been delivered. For example, as cringy as Theon's interactions with the captain's daughter are, he mentions how there's a good chance she's pregnant. He jokes about her fathering his bastard. And if that child does exist, that kid could have a claim to the Iron Islands, or at least a place as Theon's heir. It's not like he can make new heirs, after all. So that's actually quite relevant. It's another example of what we were just talking about with Davos. Early plot elements in his first chapter that speak to the entire arc, both the beginning, the middle, and the end, or at least one of those major parts. So first chapter's always juicy. So, and of course, the ship he's sailing on, even the ship, not just this possible kid of his that might be out there, the ship has more importance there. It wasn't allowed to leave, so as not to spread word of the Longship's hosting. So when Balon does die, this ship, the Miraham, does get away, and it goes right to Robb Stark in a storm of swords to inform Robb and the Northerners about what's happening with the death of Balon. And, well, he partly does it to get rewarded, but it also works really well for us as readers. Theon has an actually quite poignant thought here. Quote,
"The Iron Islands lived in the past. The present was too hard and bitter to be borne. Besides, his fathers and uncles were old, and the old lords were like that. They took their dusty feuds to the grave, forgetting nothing and forgiving less."
That's a really apt description of his father, and it's a pretty good description for, say, like Victarion and Aeron and like the Ironborn in general. That's really good. Theon describes it well. But Euron, though, that's where he's wrong. Euron is not an old, dusty guy with dusty feuds, forgetting nothing and forgiving less. No, he is a visionary, an evil visionary to be sure, but he is a very different sort of man. And that's crucial here, too, because right away, his presence in the story is hinted at. We don't know at this point what George had planned for Euron, and it's not clear from this chapter either, but Theon's afraid of him. Now, Theon, with all his arrogance and, cockiness, it's a bit notable that he's a little intimidated by Euron, even though there's not much to it here in this chapter. But there is, to rereaders, there's more in this chapter about Euron than first-timers may catch. In fact, a lot of rereaders wouldn't catch this either. It's pretty sneaky. So Theon looks for silence. Of course, it's not there. It returns the day after Balon's death, pray recall, and we know why. And, speaking of Balon's death and Euron in general, this line looms quite large.
1,000 years before, the sons of the River King had been slaughtered here, hacked to bits in their beds so that pieces of their bodies might be sent back to their father on the mainland. But Greyjoys were not murdered in Pike, except once in a great while by their brothers, and his brothers were both dead. It was not fear of ghosts that made him glance about with distaste.
Okay, so there's 3 sentences in that quote, and each sentence by itself there's something I have a lot to say about. So just first of all, the place he's talking about is the Bloody Keep, which is part of Castle Pike. And that's a neat little piece of history from the time in which the Ironborn and the River Lords were fighting each other quite a lot. The second sentence, which is this thing about Greyjoys were not murdered in Pike except once in a great while by their brothers. Well, Euron, we were just talking about Euron killing his brother, were we not? And then we find out that Euron killed 2 other of his brothers. So once in a great while is maybe an understatement, because it's happening quite a lot from Euron. He kills 3 of his brothers, and he's probably going to kill Aeron, although that one won't be at Pike, at least. So technically, that one's not at Pike. And he's setting up Victarion to die. He's basically put him in a position where he's likely to die. So Euron's kind of just killing off his whole entire own family. Can you imagine, though, thinking about Theon and how he's standing up to Balon and how he thinks he can be king after Balon dies? Can you imagine Theon versus Euron? Like, that would not be much of a contest. But I wonder what Theon would think. He's like, oh, I could take Euron. Yeah, I don't think so. And it's funny to think, too, that what Euron's capable of and what Euron could do, if he got his hands on Theon, Euron would probably do to Theon what Ramsay does to Theon. So if you were to skip several books and find out what happened to Theon and find out what kind of a person Euron is, you might think it was Euron that did this stuff to him, but no. So, but in the last line of that quote, he talks about ghosts, which is a huge thing because thematically speaking, these chapters around this part of the early part of this book, there's lots of stuff about ghosts. Arya is eventually going to be the ghost in Harrenhal. Dany goes to Vaes Teloro, where the Dothraki are afraid of ghosts. And of course, like I said, with Arya, they're talking about ghosts in Harrenhal before she becomes the ghost in Harrenhal, or a ghost in Harrenhal. And Theon himself becomes a ghost in Winterfell, which is the title of one of his A Dance with Dragons chapters. And related to why he's in Winterfell and why he feels like a ghost, there's this line from this chapter. He says he prided himself on keeping his weapons sharp. Ooh, his weapons. So he keeps his blades sharp, eh? Ooh, that's a real sneaky one, George. And not long after that, he thinks of this, quote,
"As a boy, he used to run across this bridge, even in the black of night. Boys believe nothing can hurt them, his doubt whispered. Grown men know better."
Well, boys believe nothing can hurt them, his doubt. So this is the Theon who goes to Winterfell thinking nothing can... Yeah, okay, yeah. Grown men know better, do they? Well, I don't think you're as grown as you think, Theon. It's just so easy to hate him, and later... easy to hate him here and later, but it's not new because you hated him before his first POV, probably. And you knew that when you read this the first time. But looking at his transition from hateable to pitiable, not necessarily likable, but pitiable, when he goes from a character who acts the way he does here to Winterfell, where he commits atrocities, to the Dreadfort, where atrocities are done to him, to the person who helps save Jane Poole, only to be strung up in chains by Stannis. Well,
I think what all that leads to is me just disliking his chapters. They're just really frustrating in so many ways, from being reminded of how terrible he was to how terrible things are going to be. It's just this sense where you read this chapter, you're just like, I want this to be over.
Yeah.
I know where this is going, and where it is right now sucks, and where it's going sucks.
But to speak to that, and I kind of agree with you, but on another point I don't, which is that we don't know where he's going, like, in the long run. Like, I don't think that he's clearly not gonna, do a death charge at the Night King in the books. He could, like, die at Winterfell fighting for the Starks, which would be a similar-ish ending. But he's not gonna die at the hands of a character who's not in the books. So there's like Davos, his arc has the potential to be a good bit different than the TV version. So I spent a little extra time thinking about this first chapter and looking for clues as to where he might end. There's the whole Torgon the Latecomer story where, he might, since he missed the King's Moot, that might be a technicality for them to play off of later legally. But it still doesn't necessarily take us to the end of Theon. That's just something near his ending. And it also doesn't speak to this kid, the Miraham, whether he's going to have this kid or not. And it also doesn't speak to how this is going to mix up with Asha and how, maybe if she becomes Queen of the Iron Islands like in the TV show, well, how does that work out with all this? Well, it can't, exactly. So some things have to be different. So that's one of the things that while I agree with Ashea that there's a lot of frustration in the Theon chapters, at least we don't know where they're going in the end. The final end for Theon is still pretty hidden, I think. So that's cool, at least. One thing I don't think that's going to happen for him is that one thing that it could happen for him, even though it sounds kind of silly here in this chapter, is him thinking that he'll be king one day. He's thinking that the comet is for him. Well, that I don't think is true. The comet's not for him. And he's not going to get Casterly Rock. Casterly Rock is a very unreasonable expectation. It's so silly. He's like, his own father's like, no one's ever taken Casterly Rock, son. He's like, until now. Like, bravado can only take you so far, Theon. And he thinks how awesome it would be. He's like, yeah, the Iron Islands have never had wealth and power like Casterly Rock, huh? It's going to be great. It's like, well, how do you get from point A to point B there, Theon? Your ancestors have taken note of how powerful Casterly Rock was. You don't think maybe they were like, ooh, that sure would be nice. Yeah, this is the naivete. But also he's got these really interesting identity questions, and I think that is a big part of his ending, whatever that will be. I think identity questions are going to be a big part of it. Clearly, his decision to attack Winterfell is wrapped up in these dual identities. It's partly just his clever planning, but also his naivete and his desire to prove himself to his father while being angry at never being allowed to be a Stark. But also he's impatient and arrogant and selfish and vicious and narcissistic. And he's softer than he thinks he is. A chapter later, he's going to be wobbly from wine and stuff like that. He's just not... He dresses up like someone who isn't Ironborn. He wants to look really nice and noble. He didn't dress that way at Winterfell. Ned Stark didn't dress like that. Ned Stark didn't dress all fancy. Ned Stark dressed pretty plainly. So he's projecting an image that he didn't even learn from his other father. It's just all... Yeah, he's all wrapped up in himself. And I just think it's also really well set up, though, because these batch of personality traits, as abhorrent and frustrating as they are, they do really set up his actions later very well. He thinks of Patrick Mallister, who is his friend. And Lord Jaqen Mallister is like, not excited about those two being friends. And you can understand Lord Jacen's perspective. It was literally Theon's older brother that Jaqen Mallister killed for attacking Seaguard during Balon's rebellion. There's a bit of history in this chapter where they mention the great bell at Seaguard that rings to inform all the surrounding people that the Ironborn are coming. And that bell's only been rung once in the last 300 years. Well, the fact that it's been only rung once in the last 300 years, not only does that speak to just how far gone the old way is, this thing that Balon's trying to bring back, Like at this chapter, it's not so clear how old the Old Way is and how long it's been gone. But the history books and the books that come after in the Song of Ice and Fire proper really make it clear the Old Way had been dying for a long time. The Balon bringing it back was more of a stretch than we even first thought. It looked like a stretch, but the history books show that it was an even bigger stretch than we may have first seen. So the idea that a Ironborn and a Mallister or that a Greyjoy and a Mallister are friends is something that we as fans of peace should actually think is kind of a nice thing. But it's also not, doesn't really fit the setting as far as an appropriate relationship. Lord Jaqen, like I said, killed Theon's brother, and in a world full of blood debts, he's like, it's not just the Ironborn, but like I killed his brother. Like that's Theon brushes it off like, he thinks I care. He doesn't know how crappy, Roderick was, but still, that's not necessarily a selling point for Lord Jaqen, especially because he didn't hear Theon say that. Also mentioned here is a really interesting choice of words. Patrick Mallister mentions this amorous young miller's wife he knows that they can go spend some time with. It's a miller's wife that Theon burns and mutilates. A miller's wife's kids that Theon burns and mutilates to look like Brandon Rickon. It's definitely a different miller's wife, but the fact that he uses a miller's wife in this chapter is interesting to me because that's such a big part of Theon's future. So I think that was an intentional choice on George's part to kind of nod to that coming. And speaking of that, one of those two kids that looks like Brandon Rickon might even be Theon's own kid. But we'll talk about that when we get to those chapters later. So there's quite a bit of subtle plot work going around Theon's bastards or possible bastards. And you can see why this chapter is really worth poring over for clues for his final endgame, because I think all this possibility of having kids is a part of that. Now, he thinks of himself as a stranger in Pike, which is true. I mean, he's hasn't been there in so long, and he doesn't behave like an Ironborn. He's like a faux Ironborn. And while all the features are the same, the rocks, the islands, the castles, the people are not. Their attitudes might be similar, but the people themselves are different. In some cases, they're very different people who someone he knew. Like the steward is a different person entirely, but Aeron is just a different Aeron. When Theon was taken away, it was party boy Aeron. And now he's meeting serious drowned priest Aeron. So that's a totally different thing. Speaking of, Aeron is also easy to dislike right away. I mean, who likes creepy zealot priest on a personal level? You may enjoy his chapters, but no one roots for him. It's like, go Aeron. I hope you don't root necessarily for him to suffer the way he's suffering, but you don't root for him to come out on top either. Now, we talked about Balon being stuck in the past. So like I said, this is filled out even more through World of Ice and Fire, and his own father, Balon's father, Kellon, which is Theon's grandfather. Kellon was alive during Robert's Rebellion, and so was Theon. Just, he died near the end of Robert's Rebellion, so Theon wouldn't have much memory of him, but he was around. But Theon may be aware that Kellon was fairly progressive. He was more in line with Asha's way of thinking. Asha and Kellon would have gotten along pretty well. Meaning, the old way is done. Asha, the way she talks about the Kingsmoot, the way forward is trade and peace. But Balon's like, no, bring the old way back. So, Theon has memories of the end of the rebellion, like what it was like at Pike when the torches were coming and the walls were collapsing and his people were losing. He doesn't seem terribly troubled by it. I'm sure that the memories have an impact because he's having them. But maybe he's facing it with bravado, or maybe he's compartmentalizing it. It's a little bit of trauma that he's not admitting to, because, a man shouldn't, man's got to be brave and not show weakness, but his stuff affects him more than he admits, I think. So with Balon kind of leading the Ironborn to this resurgence, I'm putting quotes, resurgence, it's Theon and Asha and Aeron and Victarion. They're all swept up in it. Balon is leading them to ruin, kind of like Melisandre is in a different way. They're all led by his bold promises, his aggressive vision, but it's bull because it's just not possible. It's just not going to happen. Euron understands that and co-ops the movement and takes it in a different direction. So, well, more on Euron much later. But it's so neat that George even includes that little bits of Euron in here, even though Theon doesn't know what to make of it. All right, some thoughts from Joe. A quote from Theon when he's talking about how he may have gotten that girl pregnant. He says, quote, "It's not every man who has the honor of raising a king's bastard." And, well, I didn't think about the double meaning, or maybe more than double meaning there, in how Ned might have something to say about that. Yep, indeed. And Theon thinks how he must never go far from the sea again. Whoops, should have listened to your own advice there, Theon. No, don't think about how Winterfell is not so close to the shore. However, maybe Theon read that really old cover of A Clash of Kings. Remember the super, super old cover of A Clash of Kings that referred to
the shores of Winterfell?
Yeah, exactly, the shores of Winterfell. So, well, Theon got his geography wrong. You can't blame him. You know, it's in print. So, very heavy hints, something that Theon doesn't think about. That, you know, maybe kind of along the lines of him not processing his trauma, is not processing the fact that Balon was willing to let Theon get executed. If Theon's attacking, Balon attacking the north while Theon's still a hostage, the law says Theon should be executed there. But Balon was apparently okay with that. Or at least he was willing to pay that price. So Theon hasn't wrestled with that realization that his father was going to throw him away like that. So my question to you guys is, not just with Davos, but again here with Theon, where does his arc go in the long run? Where is Theon going to end? How is he going to die? Is he going to have a happy ending? Is he going to... Well, he can't have a happy ending in that regard. But so because it's one of the ones I don't have strong opinions on. I only have opinions on some of the details, but not how those details form a picture. More question from you guys and a few random thoughts. Dagmar Cleftjaw is also mentioned a few times in this chapter as someone that Theon wants to see again. And we learn later it's that Dagmar was one of the few people that was good to Theon growing up. So Theon, it's a rare thing for Theon to have like a person who's close to him that was actually treated him nicely growing up. As awful as Theon is, that's something to consider, is that his upbringing was mostly people being awful to him. His brothers, his father, his uncles. Dagmar is the one exception here. Theon also thinks how, when he's thinking about Jon and Jon's personality, how Jon is quick to take insult. Whereas Theon has just taken insult over really minor things, like Theon gets upset with Aeron for not telling him Balon's invasion plans. He's like, "I am the heir. How dare you not tell me the plans?" He's like, "Balon told me not to tell anyone." He's like, "But that shouldn't include me, blah, 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 blah." It's like, hello, quick to take insult. Also, Balon mentions the Iron Price. We hadn't really learned what the Iron Price was. He pulls Theon's gold necklace off, throws it in the brazier, talks about how giving a crown is not how it's going to work. And he talks about Euron Redhand and how Euron Redhand seized power at the King's Moot so long ago. Well, Euron Redhand did it by killing everyone, but Euron Greyjoy seized power at the King's Moot through a different sort of trick, and is certainly unleashing himself on the Seven Kingdoms in a bloody way. So that is also probably a little bit of a nod to the future of Euron's plot right here at the end of Theon's first chapter. All right. Let us move on. Daenerys won. The gang hits the Red Waste, aka the one with the City of Bones. It's the one with the story of Lyness Hightower, Jorah's ex, and the one with the 3 wise men and women from Karth, and lots of other cool stuff. Quote,
"The Dothraki named the comet Sherakea, the Bleeding Star."
Another cool name for the comet. It's got lots of neat names. After an epic ending in a Game of Thrones, there's no immediate payoff from Daenerys. It's a while before we get this chapter. But that makes sense because the dragons are tiny. Dany has very few people with her. Although she does have some very cool new nicknames, Mother Dragons and the Unburnt. But she's in danger. And again, the Unburnt. Whereas Stannis is like, it's burning, you know, like, hello. Dany's in danger, doesn't have a surefire place to go, but she's confident because of the comet and her dragons, and because, well, she's a confident person. And a lot of her earliest chapters in the Game of Thrones deal with her developing that confidence and that sense of destiny. And here, this is like the payoff, sort of the beginning of that payoff, because she was thinking of all these things and how she's this child of destiny and how all this stuff is going to work out for her. And then it does. Like, she hatches dragons. She walks into a fire. So it's like a proof of concept. It's proof that all these dreams were real. But still, as real as it is, that destiny is far, far away from where she's standing in the moment as of this chapter. She needs time for the dragons to grow. She needs time to gather followers, a real army. She thinks how she has probably only about 4 warriors among perhaps 100 followers. So instead of gaining followers, at first she starts losing a few. A horse is slain to ride with an old man who passes, and then a child. Quote,
"Not for her the endless black grasses of the Nightlands. She must be born again."
So this is another great example of George weaving the storytelling in with the world building. Throughout this chapter, there's a lot of Dothraki beliefs that are peppered here and there. Right here, we learn that they have some sort of belief in reincarnation, that for children only. And see, it's great. She's not saying that Dothraki believe in this and that. She's just has this thought that this is what's going to happen, and that's how we learn. So it's a good example of it's sort of telling, but it's really more showing than telling because it's indirect. So does she feel that way about Rhaego, though? I wonder if she thinks Rhaego will be born again because he died prematurely. Mm-hmm. But in general,
it's interesting. She doesn't think about it,
She
especially considering she gives birth to dragons immediately after. So she might have been like, Rhaego was born again.
Yeah, I think that might be part of it.
And, you know, I mean, obviously, it's the whole Rhaegar is what Rhaegal's named after, but also there's Rhaego.
Yeah.
So, I don't know.
It's
But she never thinks about that. She never specifically thinks, my son is reincarnated.
No, you're right. She doesn't. I was wondering about that too. And I think that it took me to another place with my thoughts, which was that her beliefs are, she has a lot of Dothraki beliefs because she was with them so long, and she married a Dothraki person and had a half Dothraki child almost. And she's moved around so much as a kid, she never really got to know Westeros. So she's just picking up pieces of culture here and there, but most of them are Dothraki. So yeah, maybe she just has a different belief for him because of her Targaryen side, or I don't know. But in this chapter, she considers growing a braid. She's got time to think about that one since, her hair, it's not going to happen overnight. So yeah, just more and more cultural beliefs from the Dothraki here and there. Irri is so worried about ghosts in Vaes Teloro that she doesn't even think they should go in, which is a really big deal. I mean, they're losing people to starvation, and she doesn't want to go into but she's, doesn't want to go into this city that might have shelter. I mean, they're in a desert. People are like shriveling up, and she's like, I don't want to go in there because of the ghosts. And Aegon, when he goes out scouting, he finds 2 more dead cities, and one of them is ringed by skulls on pikes. And he says, well, I clearly wasn't going to go in there. And everybody's like, yeah, clearly. So these beliefs, it just goes to show how powerful these beliefs are. And that touches back on what I was saying about Stannis not getting what a big deal it is to change religions. That's beliefs are these things. You learn these things as a child, and everyone around you supports them and says, yeah, these are real beliefs. It is known. They say things like that. So it's really hard to break free from those beliefs. As for the dragons themselves, we see that their bodies steam in the cold that comes in the night of the desert. That's a pretty evocative image. Little steaming hatchlings. Oh, yeah. I've ruined it by calling them little steaming hatchlings. So Dany figures out, though, that the dragons want their meat charred. And with that realization, they become the only creatures in Urkhalasar who are not suffering. Food runs out. They start killing horses. More of the elderly perish. And Dorea does as well. She's a reminder of how much the show changed Dany's supporting cast. Massively is what they did. They changed her supporting cast massively, and this is really the point at which that happens, or at least you could say that change kicks itself off. Maybe the showrunners didn't love the idea of Dany having 10 chapters in book 1 and only 5 in book 2. So they didn't also love the idea of her being such a popular character and not being on screen a lot. So they had to invent some stuff for her on the show. which makes it ironic that they cut out so much of her supporting cast. It's like, we want to give her more screen time, but we're going to do that by cutting out her supporting cast. So, that's weird. On the show, Dorea was a scheming brunette who helps murder Irri and Jaqen and steals the dragons. But in the books, she's a blonde Lysine. In both cases, she dies pretty badly. Dany locks her in a vault with Xaro, Zoe, and Daxos, where she starves to death, and she kind of dies from starvation and fever in the Red Waste instead. But it's still a big change, because in one, Dany is executing her, and the other, Dany is like makes the whole Khalasar stop to hold her hand while she dies. And that's, to me, like a microcosm of Dany's extreme passions. They really swing really far. Her range of emotion is huge. She has great, great depths of sympathy, just as she also has the capacity for just extreme brutality. Likewise, in the show, they, speaking more about her supporting cast, they gave her Rickaro, but no Jogo or Ego. And then the actor for Rickaro was cast in something else, so they just killed him off. So no Blood Riders for Dany in the show, but 3 of them in the books, and they're all still alive at the end of A Dance with Dragons, so they're still around. Yeah, in the show, she sends 1 Blood Rider off to go search, which seems kind of silly. I'm going to send 1 scout out. Not that 3 is a huge amount, but it's a lot more than 1. And Rickaro comes back headless. Oops. Not even that. They kill her horse off in the show in this equivalent of this chapter, in the scene that is sort of the parallel to this scene here in the books. So, quick recap there. They kill her horse. They kill her handmaidens and her 1 Blood Rider. In the books, she still has those 2 handmaidens and Missandei added on. All 3 Blood Riders, and her Silver is still alive, kicking her fancy hooves. So that's going to, over time, cause even more divergences with Dany's plotline. So we'll going forward, we'll have a lot more to say on that here and there, and what those differences mean for her arc. But right here in this chapter, some of these characters aren't so big, but the Blood Riders are huge in this chapter because of their scouting. They find Vaes Teloro, and then they find Karth. And then we see them in charge of building, restoring the gates and just work projects. They're just jacks of all trades, Blood Riders of all trades. So we have Vaes Teloro. Let's talk about that for a minute. It's the City of Bones. That's a Dothraki name, of course. Vaes blankety blank is always a Dothraki title. It's almost directly due south of Vaes Dothrak. If you look at the map, Vaes Dothrak is in the far north, whereas Vaes Teloro is in the far south. So they're east of Slaver's Bay. Dany is almost as far east as she'll ever go, but that's going to be Karth. Karth, she's going to go east, and then she starts to go back west. This chapter, well, there's another reference to 3 for Daenerys, and it's also a pretty clear biblical reference. The story is different, obviously, but it has a lot of the same elements. So it's not the 3 wise men coming out of the desert like it is in the Bible, because in this case it's 2 men and 1 woman. And in the Bible, they're following the shooting star, aka the comet, whereas in this case, Jogo followed the comet. Dany says, follow Shirikia to the southeast. And in this case, the 3 wise men follow Jogo. So we have someone finding the wise men instead of them finding the messianic figure. And Dany and her dragons, that's what they want to see. Or they want to see them, really just the dragons, and her too. Whereas in the Bible, they want to see this 1 baby instead of 3 dragon babies. Anyway, so you can see, there's almost certainly more biblical references in this chapter. I'm not the best person to pick out biblical references, so if y'all know some other ones, you drop them in the chat here, or Shay will paste them in the Q&A miscellaneous portion. I'll read some of them out. I probably know Essos history better than biblical history, so let's talk about that. Many of y'all surely want to know what we know about City of Bones and the 2 smaller cities Ego found. You might be wondering about those, and we do have some info. Karth is home to the last remnants of the Quathai people who were once great. They were once a really powerful, wide-reaching civilization, but over time they had fallen on, decline, and then the Doom of Valyria came, and that made things worse for them because that in part enabled the rise of the Dothraki, and the Dothraki came for the Quathai and other civilizations like the Sarnori and some others, like the Ibbenese. Like, for example, in the north, it was the Ibbenese pushed back, and the west, it was the Sarnori. But here, quote,
In the south, other Khals led their hordes into the Red Waste, destroying the Cathy towns and cities that once dotted that desert, until only the great city of Karth remained, protected by its towering triple wall.
Not only is it protected by its towering triple wall, it's protected by the Red Waste itself. Now, clearly, the Dothraki are not too shy about entering the Red Waste. However, one brutal fact they learned is that what we see here with Dany is if you lead unhealthy people, not strong people, through the Red Waste, they're going to die. A lot of them will. And that's what happens if you loot a Quathai city and try to capture a bunch of slaves. Well, leading them back across the Red Waste, a lot of them are going to die. So if you're capturing slaves for money, and well, that's not going to work so well if the slaves just die. So we also know another thing we know about the Cathy, I don't know how to say that.
I think if we say Karth, then we should say like Cathy. We should have it be similar to Cathy. Okay. That's my thought, is that you want it to line up with Karth.
Quarth, so it's not
it's not Quarth.
Yeah,
it's not Quathai.
Okay.
I don't know.
And the fact that they had cities in the desert is, might be like, oh, well, they were desert people. They weren't, actually. The Cathy are so old that when they built those cities initially, they weren't in the desert. The Red Waste became a thing over time. Climate change, they may have caused some of that themselves with cutting down too many trees. Who knows? But the point is, that's part of why the Cathy were in decline in the first place, because their empire was experiencing severe climate change. We even get the names of the two smaller cities that Aegon found in the southwest. There's 3 ruined cities in total, by the way. 3 ruined cities in total. There's Vaes Orvik, which is City of the Whip, and Vaes Shirosi, City of Scorpions. I wonder which of those two is the one with the Ring of Skulls. I'm going to guess the City of Scorpions because, hey, keep out, scorpions. Don't go in there. There's bad scorpions. So when Aegon was exploring these ruins, he probably didn't, but could have thought about the fact that one of his ancestors, or maybe several of his ancestors, were part of the hordes that sacked them. For a less grand but more directly relevant bit of history, early on at Vaes Teloro, while these guys are out scouting, Ser Jorah tells the story of Lyness Hightower. I love the cross POV world building we get. Immediately after Theon's first chapter, we get Jorah talking about Balon's rebellion. But he's so rude. He says, quote, a priest from Myr was the first man through. You can't even use his name. We know it's Thoros. Come on. Give Thoros his due. Especially if you're going to hang out with Thoros later in the book, or books. I'm not so sure that will happen. I'm a little doubtful, because the way the show did that was a little weird. But it's possible. It's definitely possible. Because I do think the Brotherhood Without Banners will go north. So we'll see. Jorah drops a lot of names, some of which we've heard before, but a few of which are new. One of them is House Went. He says he beats Lord Went in this tournament. But that lord has clearly since died, because remember that Shella Went is in charge of Harrenhal, and most of the Went family is died out. So clearly this Lord Went has died, since he's not in charge anymore. But the other list of people he beats is pretty substantial. He beats Strongbor, and it says he beats Boros Blunt, which isn't supposed to sound impressive because we know Boros is crappy. But Boros used to be a pretty good fighter. Like when Boros was chosen for the Kingsguard, he seemed to have at least deserved it, at least in terms of his martial prowess, maybe not in terms of his personality. So there's some subtle awkwardness here, though, as Jorah mentions the Hightower family. He talks about how proud and wealthy they are, and Dany says, "Oh, and they were loyal too, right? My brother says that they stayed loyal during the rebellion." And Jorah's like, "Yeah, that's right. They were loyal to your father." Yeah, which always, since Jorah himself wasn't loyal to her father, he's like, "Yeah, about that. Let me just finish telling my story. Yeah, let's move on." He actually expresses remorse for being a slaver, which is a little unusual because before he just like spits at the name of Ned Stark as if Jorah didn't deserve the punishment. But that's interesting, right? So he's showing some remorse here, and we know that he has a lot to atone for, and he has things to atone for that haven't come up yet in the narrative, things that we know about. But this is Dany 1, A Clash of Kings, so they're yet to emerge. So a question for everyone: will Jorah take the black in the books, or die in service to Dany, like in the show, or something else entirely. He's another example of a character whose show ending is like, I don't know about that. Dying in Dany's service, well, yeah, I mean, I could see that. But at Winterfell, while fighting the others, maybe? I don't know. That's there's definitely room for a very different ending for Jorah, and for the process and the route he takes to get there to be very different as well. For one thing, he's not getting darn grayscale, I don't think. Although that could be wrong too. He just won't be, patient zero. So despite being called a ghost, yet again, remember the ghost theme that we've been talking about, because they're talking about carrying their ghosts around with them. Lyness is still alive. He refers to her as his ghost, but she is alive, and so is her father, Leighton Hightower, and so is Trigger Ormolan. Her, what's the word? She's his concubine, so he's her lord, master. I don't know what you call that.
Sugar daddy.
Patriarch, sugar daddy. Yeah, okay. That's what Ormolan translates to. So Dany, of course, is taken aback that Lyness looked like her, and she has great intuition. She has she's still pretty naive about a lot of things, like a person her age should be. But that's a distinction I want to draw. There's being naive, but there's having great intuition. She has great intuition, and over time, naive people can become not naive, but it's harder to develop an intuition over time. So she's flooded with realization upon hearing this. She's like, wait a minute. That explains a lot, and it makes her a little uncomfortable. But not too uncomfortable, because Dany is confident. She's not like, uh-oh, he's a creeper. She's like, oh, he's a creeper. Okay, well, what does that mean? Cersei tells Sansa that beauty and femininity are powerful. Melisandre demonstrates this on a regular basis, and they're right. I mean, that is true. So Dany is later being called the most beautiful woman in the world by multiple people. So she clearly has this power as well. I mean, look at her ancestor Rhaenyra, who was, quote, the realm's delight, in part because of her great beauty and high status. Dany has all that, in spades. I mean, many, many knights went full-blown Jorah for Rhaenyra, like asking for her favor or, fighting duels for her. So Jorah is an example for Dany, not just to be wary of the intentions of men, but how to use that, how to take advantage of that, how to marshal that into something useful. Like, well, because they both know, well, Jorah doesn't know. He still has, at this point, he's still hoping to hook up with her. At some point, he's going to realize that's never going to happen. So they both know that. Dany is out there knowing that Jorah wants her, and Jorah knows that Dany knows that about him. They both know it's never going to actually happen, though, so she may as well put his energy to good use, just like any king or queen would do to a devout follower. Like some swordsman comes up and is like, my king, I want to fight for you. He doesn't want to have sex with the king, but he's still like saying, my sword is yours. The fact that Jorah's into Dany doesn't really change that.
Unless the king is Duncan the Tall. Everyone wants to give him the sword.
Or the lance.
Yeah, or the lance.
In this case, right? I would love to try my lance on you, Sir Duncan.
Yeah, sometimes the innuendo is real.
And and this plays out because, Dany is betrayed by Jorah, and he has all this baggage. But Jorah is extremely useful to her. There's no taking that away. Like, if you were to add it all up, Dany would have died without Jorah. He's crucial. We can criticize him a lot, and I do. And he's creepy, and he's a slaver, but he is a gray character. And Dany is. I wonder his arc too. Like I said, we wonder how he's going to end. Is Dany going to forgive him like she does in the show? Probably, but not a sure thing. Now, Jorah also has some great lines. He has some awful lines too, some creepy lines, but this one is awesome, and I think it's maybe even a central theme to A Song of Ice and Fire. Quote,
"My handmaids say there are ghosts here."
"There are ghosts everywhere," Ser Jorah said softly. "We carry them with us wherever we go." Yeah, how does that nail the ghost theme so well? Dany thinks that hers are Rhaego and Drogo and Viserys. Jon, Ned, Tyrion, Cat, Theon, they all have ghosts too. The younger POVs have them less. There's less ghosts for them to have developed over time, but they all at least have Ned now. At least they have one ghost. And Jon has Ghost the Wolf too. Haha, good joke. And yeah, so that's just a huge theme. They carry their ghosts around with them. You can never get rid of them. They're always going to be part of who you are, and that's as true in the real world as it is in A Song of Ice and Fire. Because we're not talking about boo type ghosts. We're talking about metaphorical people in your life that affect you, perhaps constantly, perhaps day to day, perhaps every once in a while it just rears its head and you feel that person's influence on you and you don't like it, or maybe you do, but that's this concept. And yeah, as George is trying to tell, a human story with a human heart in conflict. You can't have that without people thinking about all the different relationships they've had in their life and how those impact who they are and who they're going to be. And we wonder too, I do not have an answer to this. Why did Leighton Hightower agree to Jorah's marriage proposal? I don't know. I mean, he was a lord and was a hero at Pike, but I don't know. Maybe, I mean, Lynesse kind of sounds like she sucks, right? I mean, Lynesse kind of sounds like not a very good person. Maybe Leighton was just like, yeah, take her. He's just like, get rid of her. I don't like my daughter. Take her. So, I mean, that's where I'm at right now. That's my only theory. Joe Buckley had a really good catch, and it's another Jorah quote. You got this one pulled up here, Shay?
I do. Yeah. Perhaps we are doomed if we press on, but I know for a certainty that we are doomed if we turn back. And
that is a really good parallel to Dany's recurring, if I look back, I am lost. In this case, if I go back, I am lost. But it's a really similar concept, and I'm surprised I never caught that before, because he's saying, if we turn back. I mean, that's the same phrase. It's like, if I look back, if we turn back. It's not the exact same phrase, but yeah, that's a great catch. Good job, Joe. He also wonders, from a logistical standpoint, like, how did Jorah and Lynesse get from Lys to Bear Island on their ship? That's a serious journey. That's really far. And he wonders if they would have stopped at Old Town, because that's where she's from, hey, stop at Old Town. But probably not, because they're fleeing as fugitives, and they wouldn't want to risk word reaching Old Town, because Ned would also maybe think to alert Old Town, given that he would be aware of who Jorah's wife is. Anyway. Hell of a trip.
I will say that Nina shared a link, a thing she wrote about why Leighton allowed Jorah to marry Lynesse. And
oh, okay, great
answer, and yeah.
I think Nina shared that with me before, and I forgot to read it. And that's an oversight on my part. But hey, it's not going to be too late. So hey, everybody, check that out.
The general idea is just about like the tourney reason, which makes sense when you think about House Hightower's ancestry of Maris the Maid. And Maris the Maid, her hand was won at a tourney.
Oh, cool. Tourney, so there's a little parallel story there,
yeah,
too.
And so Jorah's the champion of this tourney, and he asked for the hand. Yeah.
All right.
Anyways.
Well, it still could be that she just hated his daughter, but I think this is probably a better theory.
Yours is funnier.
Mine is funnier. So if we think about how this chapter could have gone, if there had been a 5-year gap, that's interesting too, because we talk about how Dany needs time to build for her dragons to grow, for her people to regain their strength, for her to acquire more people in the first place. Well, that might have been a little easier to write with time having passed, but at the same time, there's other things to do. Also, we get a little bit of foreshadowing, at least groundwork, for Dany pricing her dragons to Xaro Zoandaxis and to the slavers later, because Jorah says, living dragon beyond price. They're the only dragons in the world. So the phrase living dragons are beyond price or whatever comes up in this chapter. And that's basically what she says to Xaro Zoandaxis. She says, well, how many ships are there in the world? Because if you want to trade, if we're comparing dragons to ships, and there's only 3 dragons in the world, then I think a fair price is 1/3 of the ships in the world. So she gets a little economics lesson from Jorah here. See, I told you Jorah is really valuable. Another thought from Nina from before the live stream. She wonders if we may ever hear about Jorah's first wife, who was a Glover without a name. from the current Glovers. Robert and Galbert are running around, plus I can't remember the Galbert wife's name off the top of my head. She's not a Galbert by birth. She's not a Glover by birth, so she wouldn't know. She wouldn't know this.
Did she say she's not a Galbert by birth at first?
I did, yeah, Galbert by birth.
But no, I want to see a situation like
answer.
where, where Dany and that awkward situation with Sam and Jorah and Dany.
Yeah.
Where Dany had burned Sam's family.
Yep.
Just the idea that like Dany gets there and there's this awkwardness of this northern family that has something against Jorah. And in general, people will have things against Jorah, which I don't think is given enough attention.
Yeah.
That I don't think people are going to look very kindly upon him as a slaver and someone who's turned coats, and particularly in the north, which is where Dany's going.
It's a good point. Yeah, Jorah's like re-acceptance into the north in the TV show was kind of just sort of breezed over. They did have they did give the nice conversation with Jon and Jorah. I did appreciate that, but like the rest of the north was just like, there he is. There's Jorah. There were some really good discussions on Dany's arc on Flick. Some of them were a little too off topic from this chapter for me to pull y'all's to shout y'all out, but I just want to throw that out because in general, because I just thought it was really good. You guys are doing good. Also, some more dragon stuff here. Dany thinks that if she was on Dragonback, she's thinking about how she can eventually fly on her dragons. Obviously, they're too young for that now, but she thinks of she could touch the comet if she could fly on a dragon. And that's just like, wow, like what an idea. I mean, obviously she can't literally touch the comet, but it's like, it sounds like flying too high. The conception of the idea of like Daedalus and Icarus flying too close to the sun and melting your wings and all that. It's ascending to heights not meant for mortals. It sounds about right for Dany. Like she's trying to go places that, are only, they're meant for the gods, just, taking on challenges that are too large for a single person, even a person that can birth dragons. Speaking of dragons, Rakaro finds that big dragon skeleton in southwest of Vaes Teloro, and south of Vaes Teloro, and we wonder how that dragon got there. It's a huge dragon, so that's important. Maybe Valyria had some sort of battle with the Kathi people in that spot long ago, but that's a little puzzling that the bones weren't taken, which to me says that the battle, this dragon died kind of in the middle of nowhere, because if the bones were there, dragon bones are really valuable. So the fact that it's just sitting there means that, well, it means something. It means that no one was able to grab it. So I don't know what the deal with that is, but the fact that it's in the middle of a desert definitely is relevant. Okay. I have nothing more to say on Dany 1. As always, if we miss anything on a chapter, we can always get back to it in the next chapter of that character. So if we miss anything in Dany 1, Davos 1, or Theon 1, which were all in a row there, well, let us know and we'll circle back. We should turn back. But for now, let's go to Jon 2. Jon 2. The gang visits Whitetree, a.k.a. the one where all the wildlings are missing. And hey, it's also the one where we meet Dolorous Edd, the perfect antidote to the gloominess of these chapters. Fire may drive away the cold, but it's Edd who drives away the gloom. And ironically, amazingly, he drives away the gloom by being gloomy. Whoa. That's a trick.
Say real quick, there was some discussion of your shirt this week.
Oh, right on.
And people were wondering about whether there's a theme in general. Thomas Papa said, based on the spreadsheet, he knew it was a band shirt, and so I wanted to give them a shout out, and that they also thought it was probably a reference to Whitetree, that's why you chose this shirt.
That is correct. Good call, Tommy.
But if you want to look up, this is Daryl Blake and the Mance Raider tribute band. They're on Spotify. So I just wanted to give them a quick shout out before we get into things.
Yeah, thank you to Daryl and his band for sending us.
Yeah, they can't see the text on the shirt at all.
Yeah, too far down here.
You lift it up there. They can kind of like see that there is text, but
the colors make it clear.
And now they can see the, instrument and all that.
Yeah.
So
we've already quoted Edd because he's so cool even though he hadn't appeared yet. This is when he appears, but we mentioned him in Brand 1 because we talked about the dead dreaming, and he that funny quote about, oh, my gravestone is too small. Why do I get such a small gravestone? The ground is too cold. That's just a sign of how great Ed is. And this chapter, like I said at the beginning, is on the shorter end. It's the shortest of this batch. It's only 17 minutes on the audiobook. And fittingly, it has a short first line.
It is Whitetree. The village was named on Sam's old maps.
Yeah, but like a lot of other short chapters, there's plenty to say about it. Chilling name, Whitetree. First-time readers read this chapter and are introduced to a lot. And it's creepy as they read through it, but to rereaders, to people who've been around the fandom, just hearing the name Whitetree takes my mind places, and those places are scary. Astute listeners like Paige Albiniak and Esther McGriff have pointed out that Arya, Dany, and now Jon have all had chapters with deserted places. It's kind of a theme of early in Clash of Kings here, where there's all these like abandoned villages, ghost towns, and they're all abandoned for different reasons. One is more about time, the passage of time, and ancient conquests. One is fear of fear of the others. And in Arya's case, it's just war, human war. Though Whitetree Village is quite small compared to the City of Bones or even the holdfast Arya and company stay in, this huge, creepy werewood has been here for a very long time. The Raven speaks up here to agree that it's old. So it's only 4 hovels, and they're all under the tree, which makes it sound small, but makes the tree sound huge, because it's like, whoa, they all fit under this tree? So you wonder, indeed, how could the map, especially because we're told these are old maps, how could Whitetree be on the map? Well, the name of the town. It's the tree that gives us the reason here. Sam makes a great point when Mormont complains about the maps being old. He says, well, that's no big deal because the rivers and mountains and forests aren't going to change or move much or at all. And, well, that applies to this giant tree. It's not going anywhere unless, well, something like this happens, quote,
"Look at that face. Small wonder men feared them when they first came to Westeros. I'd like to take an axe to the bloody thing myself."
But taking axes to the trees is what started all the trouble in the first place, right? It relates to why the others even exist in the first place, probably, meaning that the children may have developed the others to fight against the humans, and that it was probably in part because of the killing of the tree. It's also the killing of the children. So Jon notes the huge size of the tree, calling it monstrous great. And though he feels respect for it, the face scares him too. Mormont complains that Bones can't talk, right? And that they could learn a lot of what happened there if Bones could talk. But the tree, it could remember. It saw whatever happened. It saw the wildlings depart, and it heard them talking about why they're going to depart. Yeah. So Jon here, perhaps because of his latent warg talent that hasn't emerged just yet, or because he's devout like his foster father, or maybe some combination of both, he has a very strong reaction to seeing the tree. It's mentioned it's how old it is, but he thinks he can feel the power of it. And of course, first-time readers are gonna be like, oh, it's just the awe of it. It's just like, wow, look at that thing. I can feel the power. But knowing that he has skin changer abilities, that line that he can feel the power of it takes on a whole different meaning. And of course, the two things here are linked, meaning the size of it and the age of it, right? The size of the tree and the age of the tree are linked. The fact that it's so old is part of why it's so big. Now, and obviously not all the oldest trees are huge. They have to have space to grow and get bigger. That's part of why the tree Atlantisport is so small, even though it's been there so long. And but up here in the north, trees aren't put inside castles. Trees aren't caged. Trees are not chopped down nearly as often. So as Jon hands the burned skull to Mormont that he pulls out of the ashes there, he thinks of the white that he burned. And we know there will be so many more to come. Mormont tosses the skull back into the maw of the tree, and that really makes me think. Because we understand that the wildlings burn the bodies of the dead so they don't rise again. They're like, well, we don't want whites rising. But why they're doing it in the werewood's mouth? Why are they burning bodies in the maw of this huge werewood? That's a little puzzling. I don't think we have any other examples of weirwood mouths being used as crematoriums. We could say there's symbolism here, though. That's very clear. I might miss some of it, but there's definitely some I can grab. I mean, symbolism is such a wide, broad, deep river. But there's some that I think is pretty straightforward. The fact that these weirwoods require blood and sacrifice, at least they did in the past. And we know that Craster's mother is from Whitetree. So he's a guy who offers his sons up to the others, a man who, from his own perspective, is devout and, quote, right with the gods. So we have the concept of sacrifice and this kind of unusual tree where maybe more sacrifices have been done with a guy whose mother came from this town, kind of carrying on that tradition and maybe in a little bit of a different way, leaving children out for the others to take them. So like I said, there's a lot of ways to interpret both the plotting and the symbolism, but there's no way around that the sacrifice themes dominate it all, right? That's a big part of it. Any way you look at it. So the tree is not only the representative of the gods here. I said that line all wrong. The tree is not the only representative of the gods here. We also have the raven. Perhaps a bit tongue-in-cheek or tongue-in-beak line here comes when Jon tells Mormont that Sam is teaching the old birds to speak. The old birds. Teaching the birds to speak. Quote.
The old bear snorted. You'll regret that. Damned things make a lot of noise, but they never say a thing worth hearing.
Sorry, Gior. Given how much the fandom has poured over your Raven's words for 20 years or more, many of us would disagree. That Raven says plenty of things worth hearing. If there were a triad of the old gods, like, the Holy Trinity, it would be tree, raven, and wolf, right? For the north, right? So... and we have tree and raven, so let's talk about the wolf part. We have Jon's best friend here in this chapter. Quote.
Ghost emerged from the undergrowth so suddenly that the Garen shied and reared.
Again, remember that Ghost is super, super quiet. So this is just another reminder that the horses didn't smell him or hear him. He just like, whoa, holy crap, there's Ghost. Now, Ghost can't be replaced. There's only one Ghost. But Jon can have more than one friend. And we hope he, has some happiness in his life. And he makes a new friend here. He searches one of the houses, one of the 4 houses, calls the house Dismal, and we get, quote,
I was born in a house much like this, declared Dolorous Ed. Those were my enchanted years. Later, I fell on hard times.
That line is so over the top. It's clearly meant to be funny. Like, you're not supposed to be like, is this guy for real? It's just so silly. But that's a good thing. I'm not complaining. I love Dolorous Ed. And it's funny because Dolorous Ed is a Tollet. The Tollets are land-holding family in the Vale. They're a noble house. So this could just be Ed being Ed, but it's possible he's from one of those cadet branches, the ones that don't have land, like Lothar Brune, like a member of a house that's doesn't actually get the benefit of being in that house other than having the nice name.
I mean, this is very much a George thing, a George line. I mean, he's talked about this story multiple times about Daenerys and about how he would look at that big house at the Bradys down on the docks and think that's what, he could have inherited, what could have been his, and suggest those are my enchanted years, like coming from a noble house, cadet branch with no wealth. I feel like Ed is very evocative.
That's a great point. I thought, obviously I'm aware of the things you just said, but I never applied it to Ed.
I've heard him tell this story so many times about the Brady docks.
Yeah, the Brady docks. Yeah, it used to be Brady Dock and now it's City Dock. And he, of course,
he's a Brady.
To be clear, yeah, he's by heritage, he was a Brady. So, the Brady Bunch. Yes, George comes from the Brady Bunch. So, I'm someone who gets a little annoyed by complaining and negativity. And maybe that's why I like Ed so much. He's a parody of complainers. People who complain as much as him while actually being funny. If you're good at complaining and being funny at the same time, then maybe you should consider stand-up comedy. Here's a quote. What do you think happened to them all? Jon asked.
Something worse than we can imagine, suggested Dolorous Ed. Well, I might be able to imagine it, but I'd sooner not. bad enough to know you're going to come to some awful end without thinking about it aforetime.
So that's funny, but also like, is that what's going to happen to Ed? Since he doesn't get his own POV, this is his introduction. So maybe this is where we should be looking for the biggest clues about his full arc. And I hope he doesn't come to some awful end.
as some epilogue POV thing, and it's just we're gonna be like, oh shit, it's Ed, and the whole time he's gonna be like stuck somewhere, knowing he's about to die.
So they found nothing of value in the village or in that house, but Jon found Ed, friendship with Ed, and Ed is pure gold. So since George frequently drops hints about a character's arc via that first appearance, well, we hope he doesn't have that awful end like he's quoted here. And I also hope he doesn't have, it doesn't end as a white complaining about his gravestone, because if he could be one of those dead complaining about, like, I got to march in this army as the dead. Like, I don't like who I'm marching beside. Half his head's missing, but in that joke, amidst this joke and this possibly serious ending for Ed that would make us all sad, there's a line that's pretty wise and should be considered. Quote,
"Why should death make a man truthful or even clever?"
Yeah, right? Why would it? Why can't the dead lie? I doubt Jon will lose the ability to lie when he's resurrected. I mean, Jon's a pretty honest guy, but I doubt it's just going to be impossible for him to lie from that point forward. And I doubt it will make him more clever. Beric Dondarrion was already clever. I don't know that he's more truthful. Who else is dead and telling stories? I mean,
definitely not Lady Stoneheart.
Yeah, right?
She tells no stories.
She tells no stories at all. So, yeah, it's a poignant line to consider with very broad dispersion across the series. Why would that be the case? And we wonder what's being set up with that. Are there going to be more undead characters that have agency? Are there going to be more characters like Cold Hands who are undead but can actually talk and have memories? Yeah, Cold Hands could be lying. I don't know what he would have lied about, but, well, actually I do. He lied about the pork. He lied about giving them a sow to eat when that was clearly human flesh. So we have examples of the dead lying already. We're also reminded that...
Aziz,
oh, yeah, go ahead.
Most of the dead lie.
Oh, God. The ones who are cremated don't. Yeah, lie down. That's bad.
I appreciate it every time you explain my joke.
Yeah, I'm kind of denigrating it when I do that, aren't I? Accidentally, because it's a bad joke if it needs to be explained. So I'm sort of acting like it needs to be explained. It did not need to be explained. I did it anyway. That was a good joke. I was not trying to throw shade at your joke. Speaking of shades or shadows, really, the point of this mission, or part of the point of this mission, isn't just to figure out why people are running off and why the wildlings are disappearing. It's to find out what happened to Benjen. And they realized that since Benjen would have found these villages, he would have also kept going. They know that Benjen would have wanted to find an answer. So they're going to go find the answer, or at least find Benjen. And some are more optimistic than others. Sam is getting less scared over time, for example, which is neat and interesting. But some of the others are losing their courage because they started off all bravado and singing songs, but over time their sense of dread is growing because of all the emptiness, and they're not finding animals, and they're like, where did everybody go? And Tywin, a man we've talked about before, a man who seems to know better than anyone, he says something scared off these villagers, and he's hinting at something inhuman, something supernatural, and he's mostly right. But I think anyway, we're pretty sure the reason the Wildlings have left is to go join Mance's great army that's massing up near the Milkwater. But a big part of the reason Mance has an army, a big part of the reason he's making an army, is because of the return of the others. So indirectly, Tywin is correct there. A lot of people in the chat and before the episode, were asking, is that really the case? Is it the reason that the Wildlings are not there? Is it because of Mance's army? And I think yes, I think that is the answer. But again, the reason the army is forming is, and part of the reason Mance is having success doing something that's typically very, very hard, which is uniting the tribes beyond the wall. Well, the tribes have a good reason, a good compelling reason to unite that hasn't been there for most other generations of wildlings. Like previous kings beyond the wall couldn't be like, follow me so we can not be killed by the others. Raymond Redbeard couldn't say that. Gendel and Gorn couldn't say that. They just could say, hey, join me and we'll go attack the Seven Kingdoms and get loot. Mance, he's a different sort of king beyond the wall. All right. So the idea that this tree, the Whitetree, is so huge, I think I mentioned this a little bit, but I just want to drive this point home a little more, that even to Jon, this is a point from Joe that I thought was really good, that the North is not what Jon thought. That the real North, the true North, is wilder and darker and more brutal and more supernatural than what he was brought up with. And the tree at Winterfell is creepy and telling, but this tree is something else. And he's like, wow, that is something. So Jon is learning that, and that's connecting him to his own heritage in ways he did not expect. Now, Joe points out something that I hadn't thought about. It's extra annoying for A Dance with Dragons version of Jon that everyone in this huge group, one of the purposes of this mission was to gather intelligence about the others or something and report back. But because almost everyone dies, it's hard to convince the people who are still there, like Janos Slynt and the other officers who weren't even on the wall when this mission was launched, that of the truth of what they saw. A lot of the brothers who didn't go north or newly made brothers just question the whole story, and they're like, sure, you ran into that. Sure, you did. You guys were killed. You guys did badly, and you're just making up stuff to cover your ass. And if there were more witnesses, no one would say that. All right, some miscellaneous thoughts on this chapter and questions from y'all. The sheep line is really interesting because it's familiar to something in A Dance with Dragons. Actually, not A Dance with Dragons. Yeah, A Dance with Dragons. So compare this line, those are not sheep bones, though, nor is that a sheep's skull in the ashes. Compare that to this one in A Dance with Dragons, spoken by Barristan to Resnak Mo Resnak. Hold your tongue and open your eyes. Those are no sheep bones. Dany realizes they are child bones. And Jon sees a smaller skull next to the one he first notices in the ash, and that one may be a child as well. So, this is a little thematic connection here. The mouth of the tree has a lot of dragon feel to it. It's like, wait, it's Whitetree and it's northern stuff. So where's the dragon stuff? Well, it's filled with ash and bone, and it's blackened by fire, and it's red with dried sap. So you get the black and the red, you get the fire, you get the ash, the bone. That's some dragony feel to it, right? I think so. And maybe maybe the tree represents Jon. You know, there's his heritage is the blackened by fire, red with sap, but the northern heritage is more obvious there with the tree. So I think that's neat. And of course, the death of children and sacrifice is obviously a big part of both of their arcs as well. So I think that's a connection worth considering. Y'all may have more thoughts on that. Please share them if you do. Scott Wortman points out this Jon quote, which is, my Lord Father believed no man could tell a lie in front of a heart tree. The old gods know when men are lying. Gior agrees with that and says his father felt the same. Scott points out that this line has additional meaning because we know Greenseers can just look into the past. They can just know if you're lying. They don't know in the moment, but they can see the past to verify whether these words are true or not. So it's not like a lie detector test where they can detect physiological changes in your body that indicate, raised stress that show that you're lying. They actually can see the past. Stefan B from Flick had a great question or a great point about Jon or about Sam teaching the ravens to say snow and relating that to Sam and the ravens at Jon's election. Just that one raven says snow and then says its other lines. And Sam claims, no, I didn't do that, but he may have had something to do with it. or at least maybe it sets up the idea that George was thinking of doing that and was like, nah, I'll just have Mormont's Raven cover that for us. So it's kind of a little, maybe this didn't actually happen. Maybe it's a little foreshadowing, but it did kind of happen. Maybe just not for the reason expressed here. Anyway. There are several other new characters introduced in this chapter, but because I knew this would be a long episode, I'm going to set them aside and probably do a Where Are They Now? That includes Otten Withers, Sir Malador Locke, Giant, Jarman Buckwell. I will point out that Giant has a moment that's a bit like Arya, in that Arya has that scene where she's climbing around in the trees and no one hears her. And well, Giant climbs around in the trees in this chapter. It's not that no one can hear him, but he's doing it to scout. And I don't know, it just made me think of it, climbing around in the trees. And Giant is really short, so it just made me think of that. Okay, let us go onward. Our last chapter of the day, Arya 4, the one where Arya saves Jaqen, aka the gang kills Yoren. The Lion Gang, that is. Thus, it's the last chapter where Arya is on the way to the Wall. Her path diverts from here. Sir Amory Lorch sends his raiders against this small band of the Night's Watch, and it's a slaughter. But it starts off with such a nice, pleasant-sounding line.
The river was a blue-green ribbon shining in the morning sun.
Yep. As we pointed out during John 2, this is the third chapter in a row during A Clash of Kings where the POV character spends all or most of the chapter in an abandoned locale, right? In Dany's chapter, there's the Red Waste, and of course that means very few living things until the City of Bones, and then there's very few living things there as well. In John's chapter, the Wildlings have fled from the others and gathered in Mance army, and no one is in Whitetree village, and there aren't even any animals around. Here in Arya's chapter, they shelter in an abandoned town and hold fast. All the people are gone. All the livestock is gone, so you still have that same kind of feel of the animals being gone, but for a different reason. They know war is the reason why so many of these places are abandoned, but they don't know a whole lot about what's going on with the war. Well, for example, Yoren thinks of Lady Went holding Harrenhal and how she's always been a friend to the Watch. Well, Lady Went is gone from Harrenhal, as has come up several times this episode. Tywin Lannister currently holds it, and he is also the reason so much of the Riverlands is in flames and devastated, and why so many are fleeing towards King's Landing. And well, Tywin Lannister is not a great friend to the Watch. He's not even an acquaintance to the Watch, really. He's possibly an enemy to the Watch. There's some advanced world building for Harrenhal here, too. We know that Arya's going there, but they start talking about it now, obviously, with this talk about Lady Went. And some of the rumors are brought up, like talk of people going to bed only to burn to death in the night. And it's notable that Arya hears this from Old Nan, but Lami and other people are telling stories about Harrenhal as well. So it's a story that pervades all levels of class in Westerosi society, I suppose. There aren't specific examples, though, of what happens in Harrenhal. They're all very vague, like burning ghosts and people waking up in their bed burned up, But I actually think that's there's some historical precedent for what that burning story might refer to. Lionel and Harwin Strong died in a fire that started while they were asleep, while Lionel was lord of Harrenhal, and Harwin was his heir. Harwin was Breakbones, probably the father of Rhaenyra's Valyrian kids. So a tip of the cap to all the talk of ghosts in Harrenhal here, because Arya's going to be that herself, thanks to Jaqen, and that's thanks to her saving Jaqen, which happens in this chapter. And, it's funny to think, even after she leaves Harrenhal, she thinks of herself as the ghost in Harrenhal. So that's a little one of her many, many names and titles that she picks up that sticks with her a bit. Also in this chapter, she's continuing to gather skills. In this case, she's watches curs catch fish barehanded, and she thinks she could do that because, well, it's probably easier than catching cats. And this moment gives us one of my favorite out-of-context sentences. Quote,
"Fish didn't have claws."
Fish didn't have claws. Okay, that's true. So, by itself, that's kind of funny, but you could also get creepy tinfoily with it and wonder if it's like a very, very oblique nod to the deep ones, or the the darker mermaids that may or may not have claws or fangs. And
I mean, it makes me think personally of House Tully and the fact that they weren't able to defend themselves.
hey, great point.
That's just what it makes me think of immediately.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Fish
Yeah,
are defenseless.
They're spread out. They spread
Yeah.
themselves out too thin. They're not a unit. Yeah, that's a great point. A great point. Arya also shows, just like Dany and Sansa and Jon and all the other young characters, frequently does something or expresses something naive, but also shows advanced understanding and shows like advanced intellect and talent. In this case, it's she's really good with her perspective for someone her age. She's understanding how things will look from other people's point of views, which is not something young people do very often. But it's very valuable when being a faceless person or when trying to pretend to be someone else. Understanding how that person would behave and doing it authentically is obviously huge if you're trying to be a mummer. When she hears them yelling about Beric Dondarrion, she recalls Jane Poole swooning over him and what the Dondarrion sigil looks like. Then she realizes that, hey, if I'm Arya the orphan boy, I shouldn't know those things. Arya the orphan boy doesn't know who Beric Dondarrion is and certainly doesn't know what his sigil would look like. But here's where she's still a young girl and she's impulsive, and despite her advanced knowledge of fish and their lack of claws, she just yells Winterfell during this battle, which is, she shouldn't do that. And she gets called out on it later and has to kind of backtrack. I'm like, I didn't say Winterfell. What are you talking about? Yeah, no. And another naive thought pops up that's really worthy of Sansa's first few chapters. Quote,
Arya could reveal herself to Lady Went, and the knights would escort her home and keep her safe. That was what knights did. They kept you safe, especially women.
Ooh, yeah, about that. So, this is a chapter that features Sir Amory Lorch. And at one point, Sir Amory Lorch says, young boys and old men die the same. He says that in this chapter. And he killed 3-year-old Rhaenys Targaryen, Rhaegar and Elia's daughter. So he knows about killing young, this is a young girl, not a young boy. But he also killed a young boy, a 3-year-old boy, same age as Rhaenys, into a well. The last Lord Tarbeck, apparently he did that. And that was a long time before this. So in Sir Amory Lorch's knightly career, he did very little of, quote, keeping people safe, especially women. So, yeah. Now, in the show, he's killed by Jaqen, thanks to Arya, one of her 3 kills. But in the books, the bear pit gets him, thanks to Vargo Hoat. So there's like this sort of circle of destruction sort of theme going on here, where Tywin deploys Vargo, Gregor, and Lorch and to destroy the Riverlands. And they do. They shred it badly. But then what happens to Lorch? Well, he's killed by Hoat. And then what happens to Hoat? He's killed by Clegane. And in both cases, these deaths happen at Harrenhal. And in both cases, they are eaten, right? Like Vargo feeds Lorch to his bear. And by the way, Arya notes much later that the bear is black, like Yoren, and she thinks that's kind of satisfying. And Clegane, of course, chops bits of Hoat off and feeds them to him, and to Manderly and some other people too. So, yikes! So that's just really, I don't know. I think maybe George is really making a statement about what happens when you rely on that kind of strategy of destruction breeds destruction. You lie down with violent, deadly men, and that's the end you're going to have too. And that's really telling. So Yoren maybe is a little naive too here, not in the same way that Arya is. And maybe it's fair to say that Yoren just hasn't adjusted with the times. I mean, he's been recruiting for 30 years, and as he said, he's only lost a few people, all this time. He hasn't really had great issues like this. Maybe he was a recruiter during Robert's Rebellion. Maybe he was left alone during that war, so that made him think that he could be unmolested during this war. Maybe it's just the bad luck of crossing paths with someone like Amory Lorch. On the other hand, those Gold Cloaks were willing to start something with him too. So I think what we might be seeing is here maybe a shift in Westerosi society. Yoren remembers a time when people were more respectful to watch, when they cared about it. And during his life, that has changed. So maybe it's not naive. Maybe it's just, things have passed him by. Maybe he just didn't know that the world has changed. He didn't notice it. You can call that naive, but it's definitely not the naive of youth. Now, here's a line we've seen before under different circumstances, but I want to bring it up again. Quote,
"By night, all banners look black," the knight in the spiked helm observed.
Yeah, by night, all banners look black. We've had that in Tyrion's chapter 2, and it makes us think of all banners are going to look black when the Night's Watch, or when the long night falls. And here they are, attacking the Night's Watch, the people that they should be supporting. Humans fighting humans. That is bad. You should be supporting the Night's Watch, let alone attacking them. Now, Hot Pie, nowhere near as funny as Dolorous Ed, but he's serving a similar role. He wasn't sympathetic at first. Not that Dolorous Ed wasn't. Dolorous Ed was sympathetic right away. But quickly Hot Pie becomes sympathetic. He's just a kid with a funny name, and he ends up being a huge fan favorite. Because of him being a huge fan favorite, I don't need to remind you that he survived in the TV show and that he is still alive in A Dance with Dragons, as far as we know. So let's root for that continuing. Let's root for him to survive the whole series. Come on, Hot Pie. Let's go, dude. Earlier in the Valar Rereadis series, I think it was last episode, maybe not, doesn't matter. Earlier I said that I think Arya's first full wolf dream is during A Storm of Swords in her first chapter, but you could argue that there's a snippet of her first wolf dream that you could say that maybe this is her first wolf dream right here. Quote,
"She must have slept, though she never remembered closing her eyes. She dreamed a wolf was howling, and the sound was so terrible that it woke her at once. Arya sat up on her pallet with her heart thumping. 'Hot Pie, wake up!' She scrambled to her feet. 'Wath, Gendry, didn't you hear?'
By itself, that's not proof, but no one else heard the howl, and George uses some very particular choice telling language here. Quote,
'Ari had a bad dream,' someone else said. 'No, I heard it,' she insisted. 'A wolf.' 'Ari has wolves in his head,' sneered Lami.
'Wolves in his head.' Well, her head would be accurate, but Lami doesn't know that.
I forgot how mean Lami was, by the way.
Lami's kind of, he sucks.
Really mean. I really forgot that.
She certainly does have wolves in her head. We do call them wolf dreams, so calling it a bad dream is apt. So it's a good euphemism for being a warg, but it is also an accurate dream. As they are mocking her, she exclaims that something is wrong, and someone is coming. And then the hunting horn sounds, which is blown by one of their traveling companions, warning them that, yes, indeed, Sir Armory has arrived. Did I just call him Sir Armory? Sir Amory arrived and begins burning the town, as he had been ordered to do by Sir Kevin, who was in turn ordered by Lord Tywin. So, there you go. Now, the very annoying knight with the spiked helm, the one with the all banners look black by night, he's also annoying because Roy Dotrice gives him an annoying voice on top of everything else. He was stabbed by Yoren, then knocked off the rampart. He might have lived through that. I hope he didn't. And I doubt you get good medical care riding with Sir Amory. But anyway. And she even thinks of the Hound because of all the fires. Quote,
Arya remembered the Hound's horrible burned face.
Yeah, and it's kind of not out of place, but it's not, and I wouldn't call it random, but it's not directly related to anything else other than the fact that there's a big fire. So this is maybe a little bit of groundwork for her connection to the Hound later. Amazingly, though, Jaqen will never likely know it, which is that Biter's screaming may have saved his life. Now, that's weird, right? How did Biter's screaming save Jaqen's life? Well, Arya, when she's going back to try to save them, she can't find her way because it's too smoky. But Biter's screaming is what she uses to find her way. So Biter and Rorge, of course, show no gratitude to Arya. In fact, they show the opposite of gratitude. They're willing to kill her and do worse. But then they join the brave companions. So really setting them free didn't work out so well at all. Except Jaqen does get them to help with the weasel soup incident. So that part did work out well because that's how Arya gets away from Harrenhal. And it also just reminds us of how Jaqen is dominating those two somehow through methods we hadn't seen that happened off page. Some sort of intimidation, perhaps. And of course, this all fits in with her or him getting to see her bravery and her making use of her different senses. She's unable to use her eyes. She has to use her sense of hearing, which is, hey, she that's a big part of her training arc when she loses her sight at the House of Black and White later. So it all ties together, folks. It all ties together. Combine. Connect those dots. Joe Buckley noticed the same thing we did, that it's a beautiful opening paragraph for a chapter that turns so ugly. A couple people pointed out the dead soldier. It relates to them thinking they were tasting dead bodies in the water before. Now we actually have confirmation of that. And this dead soldier has a hank of hair tied up in a ribbon. A couple of different thoughts on that. Several different people had ideas and connections to that. Nina related it to All Quiet on the Western Front. I made me think of the Maester. I'm drawing a blank on the Maester and Pate's chapters. The Raven Maester who Walgrave, Archmaester Walgrave, who had when Pate opens his lockbox, finds a hank of blonde hair, and it's a neat concept. The idea of it's not something that people do that much in modern times anymore, but it's kind of a neat idea of a hair being a keepsake because of the way hair lasts, and it's a very human thing. It's a really, like, if you could put a single item in someone's pocket that would make you feel sad, George chose well. Like a locket with someone's face, that would work pretty well too. And in fact, in the Walgrave example, there's hair and a locket. But a dead commoner soldier, probably not going to have a locket. That's too fancy. So this was like the perfect sentimental item to put on a corpse to make us all go, oh.
I want them to like have a locket, which already the locket is difficult for someone like that to have. But getting someone to paint a portrait, right?
Yeah.
Very difficult. So I want them to have like drawn a little stick figure of their beloved to put in their fancy locket.
Get Thomas Pappas on that. He's an excellent stick figure artist.
Oh, perfect.
Captain Hema Helminth, sellsword captain, stick figure artist. Speaking of the taste of the bodies in the water, Joe Buckley points out that Arya is going to taste that again, but as Nymeria when she finds her mother's body in the water. Aww. And this is the first time that we see Arya like killing people on purpose. Like she sort of killed that stable boy impulsively, kind of as a reaction, and he was attacking her and all that. So this is just, hey, people are coming to kill us. We got to fight back. And she handles herself pretty well. You know, she keeps her cool about her, and she certainly shows her bravery. And Gendry shows his true colors too. Hot Pie is a little scared, but he sticks with them. And Gendry shows his bravery too. He saves the crying girl Weasel. And Yoren himself, on top of all that, his last act is to tell Arya and the other youngsters to leave, to run away, to save themselves. And as Joe puts it, there's a lot of Ned and Yoren, it seems. And that's a great point because we already talked about that. We already showed that Ned and Yoren had things in common. And that Ned and Yoren do seem to be cut from the same cloth. Ned and Yoren could have switched places at birth and turned into similar people because of this type of person they are. Rob Swelze points out, oh, very, very nice. He says Cat does claw her face, meaning fish with claws. She claws her own face during the Red Wedding. Wow, great catch. That's true. Damn, that's also very tragic. Abraham Gabeyu says in the next chapter when she's trying to catch fish, she struggles and admits that catching fish is harder than catching pigeons. Good catch. I forgot about that.
It's going to be a little hard to catch the blackfish.
Yeah, very true. Yeah, it's that whole, the light, the water isn't, the fish isn't where it looks like it is because of the light being bent by the water. Yeah.
Edmure was really easy to capture, though.
He's a floppy fish. A lot of people actually in the chat and in the Facebook, and I think on Flick as well, were wondering if Yoren led Alistair Thorne north. Whether he was the one that led Alistair Thorne north. I would guess no. I would guess that Thorne took ship, like a lot of the higher-born people. They sail to the wall rather than marching the slow way. But I'm not super confident about that. So yeah, it could be. Abraham also points out the steel shadows description of the figures around Lorch and the quote, death was around her, and how this battle has a lot of feel to something in the north where you have death around her, could be, being surrounded by the undead, and steel shadows. Like the term of shadow is used a lot to describe characters who are helmed like faceless. I don't mean like faceless men like the assassins. I mean like we don't know who they are. Like you see a group of soldiers and they're nameless because we don't have names for them. They're just men in armor and weapons. They're often referred to as shadows because they have no personality. But it also works a figurative connection to things like the others and the undead. And Abram also points out how Arya, getting into the tunnel like at the last second, just as it's collapsing, and how that kind of is a little bit similar to Bran getting into the cave at the last second as the undead are chasing him outside Bloodraven's cave, and how when the description of Arya's and the cool earth, and how she gets worms in her mouth, and she's like, oh yeah, but it tastes bad, but it means it's fresh and damp and safe. And Stefan B. also points out that building on our thematic connection to the abandoned places, the others are not humanity's only enemy. Humans are their own worst enemy. And in fact, which is really well expressed here by pointing out that, all these abandoned places that Yoren and Arya and company are passing are abandoned because humans are fighting humans. And really good point. And Tree Girl had a really good catch, super deep cut here. She points out the description of the inn that they're out, and then it's really similar to the one in the Mystery Night, particularly the mention of pilings out over the water, which is, how an inn or a building can be partly out over a lake, and like half of the building extends out over the water. This could be the spot or near the spot where Dunk and Egg took the ferry to White Walls. She expands on this idea by pointing out White Walls was taken apart stone by stone when Bloodraven took it, and that the houses that Arya and company see nearby are all white. So maybe they got this building material from the taken down castle, some of it. That would explain why the colors match, and it would explain the matching description as well. So that's a really good catch. That's a super deep cut there. I'm wondering how Rorge, Biter, and Jaqen escaped because, Arya, gave them the axe and they cracked the carriage and got out of the carriage, but they did not follow her through the tunnel. But, they're good fighters, so I guess they could have just fought their way out with a little smoke inhalation. Now, to put things in perspective, Gendry asks at one point how many there are, and Arya guesses 100, maybe 200. We know he was originally sent out with 300. Tywin says, unleash Sir Gregor and send him and Vargo Hode and Armory Lorch as well. Each is to have 300 horse. So maybe he actually had closer to 300 there, but on the other hand, he may have lost a bunch of men on the way. Like he lost at least 10 or 15 or 20 men during this battle, so... And even though they were up against overwhelming odds, Yoren, that is. So, anyway. So it's too bad that Yoren drifted off the King's Road to avoid the Gold Cloaks because they went right into this kill zone that Tywin declared for Lorch and Hote and Clegane. And we learned that back in Tyrion 9, which is the last chapter from Game of Thrones. And... I had missed that before. I know I said this already, but I'm just my head's spinning a little bit about how Tywin's legacy is destruction and how even these men he sends out to do killing just end up killing each other. I love to point out funny little bits with my ebook and misspellings. Every once in a while, there's a weird misspelling. This was not a misspelling so much as 2 words out of order. So real quick quote: "The boy hacked at his hands with the sword short until the man dropped away." The sword short. That should be a the short sword. His short sword. So what's a sword short? I don't know, like a little knife? I don't know. And our last question of the day from Rob Swelzy. Our Swelzel. Sorry if I said your name wrong, Rob. Arya 4, I think, symbolically foreshadows the Battle of Winterfell during the coming long night. Endless enemies, climbing walls, everything's on fire, and escape through underground tunnels. Yeah, I was touching on that a minute ago, and Rob, I think, expanded on it really well here by specifically tying it to a Battle of Winterfell specific location rather than me just saying I just was talking about some battle coming and how that sounds like it could be the Army of the Dead, but specifically the climbing of walls and escaping via an underground tunnel, and it being at night with lots of fire and shadows. Great catch, Rob. I agree with you. I think this is a hidden gem in Arya 4 where I think it's easy to miss and easy to not even be thinking about the Long Night or the North or Jon or any of that stuff. But this is why we have to always be aware when we're reading. George is a sneaky, sneaky man. So how about that? Another really long episode. And some of y'all were wondering why we dropped to 6 chapters per episode. And well, I will at least say that the early chapters in A Clash of Kings are longer than the later chapters in A Clash of Kings. So these episodes, while I know a lot of you aren't complaining that these episodes are long, it is a lot to take in within a week's span just before we drop another one. So it's a little ironic that I'm telling you that we're doing 7 chapters next week. But I don't think it will be longer than this episode. Hopefully it'll be shorter.
Yeah, this one is longer than our longest one. It is now our longest.
Very, very long. So when we get to, like I said, when we get to later in Clash of Kings, there's less groundwork, less setup, less foreshadowing, and more action. And we usually have less to say about action, but there's of course plenty more foreshadowing and groundwork and character connections and all that other fun stuff. So we will be continuing at full speed ahead. Next time on, like I said, 7 chapters, starting with Tyrion. Tyrion 3. The gang is accused of incest, aka the one where Tyrion starts the chain.
Bran 2. The one where they hear about Ramsay, aka the gang meets Manderley.
Tyrion 4, the gang gets tricked on marriage alliances, aka the one where Tyrion counts to 3.
Sansa 2, the one where Dantos sends a note, aka the gang drinks true wine.
True wine. I love the way Roy Dotrice pronounces true wine. Arya 5, the gang is captured by the mountain, aka the one where Lamy yields.
Tyrion 5, the one where they argue about Myrcella, aka the gang prepares the wildfire.
And Bran 3. It's Tyrion, Bran, and it's at the start of next week, and it'll be Tyrion, Bran at the end of next week. This one will be the one with the harvest feast, aka the gang meets the Reeds. So I hope y'all enjoyed our episode. If you were expecting it to be on Sunday, we apologize. Follow us on social media to be aware of announcements when we don't have the episode at its usual time. But I'm also happy that we got to do the episode at a time that enables some of you who normally can't come to participate.
And I'm ready for us to do an episode in the middle of the night here so that we can really open things up to other people.
We are going to do that. Yeah, that is a good idea.
I'm just excited for it.
You know what we're doing? We're doing the like I said, the Halloween one is on the 28th. That's a Monday. Maybe that's the one we could do late at night. Is it like a Halloween late at night one?
Yeah, it'll be middle of the day for people across the world, but regardless, that's the point. It won't be so spooky for them.
You'll get a different look at us, different states of mind in the middle of the night.
We're at the regular time next week, 3 p.m. Sunday.
Yes, we'll be back at the regular time next week, 3 p.m. Eastern Sunday. And like I said, probably another big one. But like I said, they'll start to get shorter as we get forward. And
that's what they all say.
That is what they all say. I'm part of them all now.
Mm-hmm.
So
someone, J-Dead Redhead, said it'll be a pajama cast. I love the idea that if we have to be required to wear PJs.
We should be required to wear PJs.
We should. It'd be real fun.
All right, then. The idea is forming here live.
I'll write it down in my notepad because I do like that idea. Although, honestly, if you guys, if we ever panned our camera down to our legs, you would see that we're almost 100% of the time are wearing pajama pants. Just a shirt. And our pajama shirts are normal, pajama. Yeah. Anyways, we'll figure something out. I'll get Aziz a onesie.
I have a onesie.
Oh yeah, I guess so.
It's that light blue one.
Yeah, okay, so you'll wear that.
I've worn it once. This could make twice.
Yeah, Pat Riley says, can y'all dress up for the Halloween stream? So
I can wear a onesie
pajamas,
and a
onesie.
cloak.
Oh, perfect. Okay, so cosplay stream. Yeah, we'll think about all this. Perfect.
So thank you to everyone who came. Thanks for the ideas about the cosplay pajama stream and all the other suggestions and comments from everyone who attended live. Thanks to anyone who spreads the word about History of Westeros. Like and share if you can, or if you're so inclined. You'd be surprised how much liking a video, upvoting on iTunes comments, you'd be surprised how much that matters, how much that helps trigger the algorithm or catching the algorithm. Thank you to Ashea for wearing so many hats and having tentacles. Thanks to Sir Buckley. Check out Isle of Faces podcast. These episodes are called Scraps and Scrolls. They are add-ons to our coverage of Valar Rereadis. Thanks to Michael Klarfeld, aka Claridox.de, for the maps. And thank you to Kevin MacLeod for the music, and as well as Jesse Kowal and Joey Townsend and Jesse Kowal for our original intro music. Thanks to our Bengineer for the editing. Thanks to everyone who commented. Nina, the History of Westeros mods, for making all the great threads and discussions. Thanks to everybody on Flick, Abram and Tree Girl, and everybody else. You guys are really adding a lot to these episodes, catching things that we missed. Quite a few this time. There's several that we missed this time that were added in by y'all. Some just right before the episode, and some well in advance. So join our Flick and Facebook communities. And soon we're going to have we have a Discord server ready to go that we haven't launched yet. So that's going to be up pretty soon.
That was something I was talking to in the chat with someone. I had no idea we decided between Discord and Slack.
Well, it was kind of decided for us, honestly, because one of our very generous patrons, Sir
Pat
Slorp.
Riley?
Yeah, Pat Riley. He goes by Sir Slorp.
He's the one I was talking to in the chat.
He just did it. He made it for us. So I'm like, well, that kind of breaks the tie a bit.
I would like people to chime in. I don't remember who it was, but when we brought this up before, some people said they would not use Discord, that they would refuse to use it, but I don't really remember who that was.
I don't think there's any reason why we can't do both. I don't think we're not going to launch them both at the same time. It's a little weird, but we'll stagger that.
Yeah, I wanted clarification on that regardless, because it was a while ago and I don't really remember who or why.
Well, we had a vote on Patreon and Slack won, so we should do Slack.
Okay.
But this was basically given to us. I'm not going to just throw it away. I'm not going to not use it. I didn't, so we're going to, I think we'll end up doing both, because we basically have a donated Discord channel. The effort was donated.
Okay, cool.
And Slack shouldn't take much effort, but I'm not going to work on that while I have to do Denny's song. We have scripted episodes. I'm kind of like priorities here,
Yes, but regardless, if you said anything to us, we didn't forget you.
Yeah,
we forgot you. We don't remember your name, who said it, but we didn't forget the sentiment.
So if y'all have more thoughts on that, certainly let us know. You can email us at westeroshistory@gmail.com or join one of those groups and comment there. That way other people will comment on it, because if you send us an email, then no one else will weigh in. But and Patreon as well. You can email us there. And thank you as well to everyone who supports us on Patreon. Go to patreon.com/History of Westeros if you would like to sign up and help support the show. And I think that about covers it for today. If you stayed for the whole 3-hour live stream, we really appreciate that. And we will see you all.
Thank you, Aziz.
Thank you, Ashea. Actually, you got up for like 2 minutes to walk into the kitchen to handle a loud cat. So.
I did not walk into the kitchen. I did not leave the room.
Oh, you're right. You just opened the door
and brought a cat into the room.
So he would stop scratching at the door.
Yes.
Anyway, folks, thank you again. And we will see you all next time for more Valar Rereadis.